and we'll do that through the town clerk's office. I just wanted to let you know about that. So now we move directly to Article 15. And who is presenting? Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Heather Klisch, Precinct 7 town meeting member and a member of the Community Planning and Development Commission, also known as the CPDC. I'm here to present tonight on the zoning bylaw amendment. I will also let you know that it's been a good couple of years since I've stood up in front of this many people and made a presentation, so bear with me if I get a little nervous along the way. Also here to answer questions later on are town staff, town planning staff, town legal staff, and what I'll do is walk through some explanation of how and why we arrived at the amendments, and then get in through the amendments, and then of course there will be discussion. Section 10.5, which is the Downtown Smart Growth District.
Do we have a point of order?
Yes, I am.
Is there any objection to speaking beyond 10 minutes? None appearing? Continue.
Thank you. Also known as the DSGD, or we call it the 40R Overlay District. Wonderful, thank you. After a public involvement process that spanned 8 months, CPDC opened a public hearing on the amendment on December 6, 2021, and it was continued on to January 10th, January 24th, and February 7th, with some discussions into the wee morning hours for those of you who are with us, after which the hearing was closed. On March 14th, 2022, CPDC voted 5-0-0 to recommend Article 15 to the April 2022 annual town meeting. All right, so let's get into some explanation. In front of you, to familiarize everyone, this slide shows a map of the Downtown Smart Growth District outlined in purple. The district is bounded, if you'll follow me, by the train tracks to the south, including the Walgreens, which some people know as the former Rite Aid, on Bolton Street, and then it extends approximately 1 block east of Main Street until Union and Woburn Streets, then sort of zigzags back up north along the commercial properties between Haven and Woburn Street, and then goes along the commercial properties between Haven and Woburn Street. So constructed and approved 40R projects are labeled in purple, and some other landmarks such as the train depot and CVS are labeled in black. So you can see we've got the projects, and on the next slide we'll show what there is, but some interesting statistics is that there are 48 total acres, 17 developable lots, about 17 developable acres is what I'm trying to say, 148 lots, most of which are under 10,000 square feet. Some of you may be like me and not be great at memorizing addresses, so the properties that we're talking about that have been constructed or approved are these. There's 30 Haven. Many of us know it is where Pomplamoose is. This is the building where those of you who lived here a long time will remember that the Atlantic supermarket was there. There's the Postmark building. This is the building where the US Postal Service vacated the building. That building was vacant a while and it was redeveloped as a 40R project. Rise 475 is down where Drew's Stews is. Ace Flats is the one along Gould Street. 14 Chapin is a residential only project that's down on Chapin Street. 6 Chute Street is one that's been approved but not yet built across from the depot. The Chronicle is one that is now under construction on Main Street. It's where the old Chronicle newspaper building was. That building sat vacant for a while. And then 18 Woburn is one that has been approved but not yet constructed. It's located on a lot on Woburn Street, kind of across the drive that you take to enter into the parking lot behind CVS. Those of you who have lived here a while may recall that there was a little white building that burnt down a number of years ago, and that lot has sat vacant since then. All right, So what is 40R? What does that mean? 40R refers to the chapter of Massachusetts law that enables a municipality to adopt an overlay zoning district to encourage mixed commercial and residential use, affordable housing located near transit areas and other areas of concentrated town centers or highly suitable locations. In Reading, we actually have two 40R overlay districts. The Gateway Smart Growth District, which is entirely built out with Reading Woods down South Street, and the Downtown Smart Growth District that I just showed you, and that's the subject of what we're talking about tonight. So this is directly from the Chapter 40R website. What this is Chapter 40R encourages communities to create dense residential or mixed-use smart growth zoning districts, including a high percentage of affordable housing units to be located near transit stations in areas of concentrated development, such as existing city and town centers, just as I just described. All right, something to also keep in mind, because it's easy to get confused, is that 40R is not 40B. I'm just going to take a few seconds to help ensure that we don't get confused by them, to help ensure that this 40R bylaw is not inadvertently confused with 40B, which many people have also probably heard of, and which is also about affordable housing. It's also because effective use of our 40R district impacts the extent to which we are subject to 40B development proposals. So we do have a few 40B projects in Reading. However, 40R is not 40B. It differs from 40B in a few key different ways. Under Chapter 40R, towns establish zoning. We have dimensional open space waiver criteria. We have design guidelines about massing, scale, aesthetics, and the developer must comply with our zoning and design guidelines. Compared to 40B, which is also about affordable housing, where the developer does not need to comply with our zoning, design guidelines, none of that. So 40B is not subject to the design guidelines. 40R also expressly allows mixed use, and by that I mean housing and commercial, and mixed use is good because it brings people directly to where the businesses are. We have businesses, we want to support the businesses. When you have people near the businesses, they can walk, they don't even need to drive. You have ready customers right there. So ultimately, it helps preserve the vitality of historic downtowns and business areas, which has been a community goal. All right, so how has the Downtown Smart Growth District been significant for Reading? It does help us to accommodate our forecasted share of the region's growth in a planned and intentional manner. Change and growth will happen. We can't control that. What we can control is how we manage and steer change and growth. So this allows the town to manage this growth at the local level. It helps us to continue to meet the state mandate that we achieve and maintain 10% of the town's housing stock as affordable, because that's the level. If we maintain that, we are not subject to 40B projects. And this has been successful. We are above our 10% threshold. It also enables the town to achieve the 10% mandate by development projects that then respect locally established zoning and design guidelines, the things that are an expression of what we want to see as a community. I already mentioned that it promotes mixed-use housing. It promotes mixed use. This is terrific. We've got an immediate customer base. It also provides a mechanism through which the town is able to keep our downtown vital, preserve what's important, and ensure that we are queued up for opportunities for economic investment in our downtown. It plays in this way because it also can be an indirect revenue generator. It plays a critical role in offsetting another override. All right, so why is this amendment needed? For a few reasons. Just to review this, CPDC does recognize that the pace of the development in the downtown has been faster than many people anticipated when we last updated our 40R bylaw. We also continue to reflect on the lessons learned in the process of implementing the current bylaw. And we also acknowledge, there have been some instructional motions, that there is a desire among our community for growth within this district to feel less urban. There have been 2 instructional motions. This has overall, this combination of factors led CPDC to really take a full, complete, holistic review of the 40R bylaw that was informed by a robust public process, and now we have the kind of complex amendments that we're bringing to you tonight. So the public process, the desire to take a full holistic review. It wasn't just us sitting around at meetings reviewing it. We engaged in a deep public process that ran from March 2021 to just this February 2022. It started with a well-intended staff-led zoning workshop, and then we had a subsequent public involvement process that was dubbed Your Downtown, and it was done with the assistance of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC, which is our regional planning agency. It included a townwide survey that received over 1,100 responses, 2 focus groups with stakeholders, and 2 online community presentations regarding development trade-offs and how zoning can advance a vision. As I mentioned earlier, the CPDC then opened our multi-night public hearing on the it was a public hearing that ran multiple nights on the 40R bylaw amendments on December 6th. As some of you can attest, it was 4 very long nights. I found out what the church clock sounds like at 1 o'clock in the morning. And here we are, we are coming to you with these amendments. I'd like to get into what we heard in the Your Downtown survey, because the amendments are very much a reflection of what we heard from the community. So I'd like to take a little bit of time to go through that. As I mentioned, there were over 1,100 respondents, 98% were Reading residents, 5% of them lived downtown. A key question was, how well is the Downtown Smart Growth District working? And I'll remind you here that the text in red is simply there to highlight key takeaways. So one of the takeaways here is that a majority of respondents, 66%, felt that the Smart Growth District is working moderately to extremely well. A third of residents, a full third, felt it is working only slightly well to not well at all. So that's something. Why? When people who said it wasn't working well or slightly well, there wasn't enough parking, there's not enough open space, there's too much density, buildings feel too boxy, we need commercial diversity, and there were people who said we really do need affordability. Okay, what else did we hear? We asked people through surveys and through the focus groups, how can we achieve open space in our downtown, reflecting that people wanted the open space. And answers were really mixed, and the amendment that we're bringing to you really reflects that. 40% wanted small, numerous open spaces. People wanted private courtyards, green roofs could be helpful. The other thing that we heard is that a portion, nearly a third, supported allowing more density or higher buildings in exchange for open space. We asked a little bit about trade-offs that our community members would make. We also asked, how well do current setback requirements foster pedestrian comfort? We've heard a lot about setbacks. Not a full majority said only moderately well, and over a quarter said slightly or not at all. What people wanted with greater setbacks was a feeling of openness, something as simple as that, visual interest through landscaping, and just under 20% wanted more usable open space. What else did we hear? We asked people what would prompt them to feel that higher density was justified. The predominant answers were things like open space, more parking, more affordable housing, and transportation improvements. Better sidewalks, intersections, all of that would be trade-offs that people would make for higher density. Continuing with what we heard, we also heard that people thought that the current approach to lot coverage, that's the portion of a lot that is covered by buildings and structures, less than half felt that it was working moderately well. A little less than a third thought it was working slightly or not well at all. What were the reasons why? Some people simply said, we just don't like the scale of it. Some people said we want more green space. Some people said we want more parking. Some people also said we really want better commercial options. So what would people exchange for reduced lot coverage, for less lot coverage? People would be okay with, well, almost half would be okay with taller buildings. A portion would be okay with reduced parking. And a third wanted fewer, smaller buildings and simply less density. Alrighty, so in sum, we heard these things, and this is going to be a refrain through our amendments. People want parking, people want open space, they want commercial diversity, Affordability continues to be important, less density and increased setbacks. Open spaces, people felt, could be small. They could be private or public. They could be green, landscaping. Open space could also count as something like wider sidewalks. Increased density, people felt, can and should be justified by providing some or all of the above. Overall, the takeaway would be that limiting lot coverage to a percentage of area allowed to be covered and adding setbacks are unlikely on their own, all by themselves, to consistently yield the type of benefits residents said they wanted, especially for quality open space that's usable, provides visual breaks, provides the things that people want. So with all of these factors, there are areas of interest that are combined. We determined that we determined that it would probably be most fruitful to specify what Reading wants, because there's no clear-cut answer there. People want a mix of things. What Reading wants overall, and ask developers to figure out how to fit this mix of things onto a site as part of their design thinking. What you will see then in the amendment is an expression of what we want, with flexibility for how a developer might incorporate these elements in consideration with site opportunities, site constraints, what's the street like that this property's on, what are the abutting uses, how does this all fit together? So with that, the goals of our amendments that I'll get to, I really will get to them, is to align the zoning changes with the broad community sentiment that we heard and I just went through. We also wanted these zoning changes to get at the intent of the instructional motions that town meeting gave to CPDC. We want to require public benefits in exchange for the densities that we allow or that people may get. And we want to continue to inspire investment and reinvestment in Reading through a sophisticated, flexible, and what you will see is a waiver-based approach to zoning requirements. This is a way to say, here are some things that you can get for a development in exchange for the public benefits that people say they want. Alrighty. Wake up now, we're getting to the amendments. Alrighty. So we do have a number of amendments you probably saw. They're a little bit complex, and the way that the bylaw by necessity is structured is that different topics are kind of spread through different sections. So what I'm going to present to you are 5 categories of amendments. You will find them on different pages. I'm not going through them in a linear fashion to what you will see in your warrant report, but if you have questions about where things are, we can get to that in the questions. So we're going to start with the first category is something we have heard loud and clear, is the promotion of open space. A big section of this area is adding an expanded definition of open space to the 40R overlay district language. The section, the 40R bylaw, but the 40R portion of our bylaw basically had no definition of what open space means to us, even though the provision of open space is even currently a consideration for a 40R waiver and plan review. So you can imagine, we get into discussions about, well, that's not open space, well, that's open space, well, that's not open space. We wanted to provide a clear definition. So in this definition, in these categories, we say what we want. And that ideally will preclude developers from just counting whatever space isn't occupied by a building or pavement and calling it open space. Just because it's there doesn't mean it's the kind of open space or quality open space that we want. If it's not useful, functional, green, all of that. So, and when we were defining open space, it was important to CPDC to account for the varying opinions that I just told you about that we heard, that it can be public or private, it can be at grade, or it can be on a roof, or on like an elevated, maybe second floor area. It could be a small strip offering a visual break, or a larger, more usable area. It could be discrete, connected, green space, hardscape, patio, public art, all of these things. So we've defined these as open space includes, and these aren't mutually exclusive. Civic space can be green. Open space can include green space, and we've outlined what the types of green space it can be, and it can also include private amenity space. Civic space is clearly public space. Green space, civic space, or private amenity space can be green. Private amenity space is that area that allows the residents of a building to step out, get a breath of fresh air, be social, whatever, without having to find, say, a nearby park. This is an amenity to the people who live there. All right. In doing so, this is a fairly simple amendment here, is that because we wanted to promote open space, but our previous bylaw didn't include it specifically as even an allowed use. So we added it as a specific allowed use. We also added some language, quite a bit of language, into the design component to talk about what we wanted to see in terms of design of open space. This section here has all of the language that speaks to the location of open space, the relationship to the street, public access or not, maintenance arrangements, if it's going to be public, who's going to be responsible for that, and we want to see that clearly, et cetera, et cetera. And when I say et cetera, I'm not trying to gloss over anything. I'm kind of assuming people have read it, and I want my presentation to be an hour, not 2. So that's what I'm doing. So the next category of amendments are a series of amendments that were made to protect abutting uses. The language in this category was, I believe, entirely proposed by a resident or a group of residents, and it's in line with the language that was in our design, that is in our design guidelines, and we wanted to bring that into the bylaw. CPDC felt that it was appropriate to just strengthen it by bringing it into the bylaw. Okay, so one of the things that we did is we added a notion about protecting abutting uses to the overall purposes. This is the overall purposes section of the 40R bylaw, and we want to ensure that the physical character of these projects within the district is compatible with nearby buildings, particularly with nearby residential uses. Just bringing this over from the guidelines, making it law if you approve it. The other thing that we did is that we brought in definitions for district edge. Remember the purple line that I showed you? Well, the slide showed you. We wanted to define that district edge, and we also wanted to bring in the definition of the transitional area. The transitional area is where the district, the smart growth district, abuts I think it's entirely residential, but where basically it abuts other uses that are not the smart growth district. These definitions are all already in our design guidelines, and again, we're just bringing them over so that if you approve them, they'll be part of our bylaw. Oh, there it is. Thank you. There is that purple line is the district edge, and that's where you could see the district edge would be defined and clarified and put into law, and the transitional areas are the areas that are just outside the district edge. Okay, the other thing that we did is strengthen the bylaw by adding language to our criteria for plan denial. And here we are saying that we are saying that it would be cause for denial of a plan that if the AA is the approving authority, that's CPDC in this case, that in massing, scale, size, or architectural design, if a project fails to be compatible with the character of nearby residential or other buildings, we would have reason to deny that. Okay, see, now we're moving along quickly. The next category is as-of-right projects. These are projects that would not require a waiver, that if they came in and they met these criteria, they would just be able to be built. This thing that you see in front of you is what we call the dimensional table. What we've done here is added requirements for the minimum lot area, and I'll explain this briefly, the total minimum setback from more than one lot line. The minimum lot area is probably self-explanatory. We're saying that if you have a lot, you must have a lot of 6,000 square feet in order to build under this bylaw. The total minimum setback from one or more lot lines is 30 feet. That's a combined setback. So, a property generally has 4 sides, sometimes 3 sides. The idea here is that overall, around the circumference of the lot, we want to see a total 30-foot setback. So that could be 15 feet on either side. It could be 15 feet in the back, 10 feet on either side, 5 in the front. If I keep going on, you'll see what a terrible mathematician I am, but hopefully you get the picture that there can be a combination of setbacks from abutting uses or from the street, depending, again, this provides the flexibility, depending on what's going on, and we can get if you have questions about that, I can give some examples of things that come to my mind. Okay, this is a follow-on from that dimensional table. This is language underneath that dimensional table that explains setbacks and stepbacks. This is also pulled over, I believe, from definitions in our design guidelines. But basically, it's saying that CPDC can require, we may do this, we're allowed to do this, additional setbacks and/or stepbacks for projects in a transitional area. So, again, if it's abutting other uses. A setback, just so we're all talking the same language, a setback is the distance between the lot line and the building. A step back is up at a higher level when a building is constructed, so that actually, like, the next level may be recessed or stepped back. So a step back is at a higher level. A setback is what's happening at the ground level. Okay, for each of these, when I go through what the changes are, I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about what the impacts would be or would have been on the projects as they were designed and built and approved that we see out there. So the postmark building, remember the highlighted projects would be the ones that would be able to comply with this requirement. The takeaway from this is not all the projects that have been constructed would be able to be built as they were under this bylaw if we were to change it. The ones that would be the postmark, 14 Chapin Avenue, and 616 Chute Street. And if you can't remember the addresses, I've got pictures for you later. All right, another as-of-right element is parking. What we've done here is a change that we've made is it increases the parking requirement for 3-bedroom units and over. We've increased that to 2 spaces per unit. We also now specify the % of compact parking that's allowed. We didn't do that before. Also, the size of the compact parking space and the drive aisle width. So with this is saying you can have up to 25% compact parking space. Why does that matter? It matters because the area that is the parking garage is an area that takes up space on the ground floor. So the more compact parking areas, essentially, theoretically, the smaller the parking garage can often be. Okay. What projects would comply with this requirement? The projects that would comply as they've been approved and sometimes built are the Chronicle, 14 Chapin Avenue, and that one on 18 Woburn Street. Okay, another change that we made was to the commercial space. What you see, and here I realize I didn't do this very well before, but what you see in bold and italics is the new stuff. Cross out is, strike through is clearly what we're taking out. What we're adding here is a requirement that at least 10% of the gross floor area be commercial. I'll pause and say that's not 10% of the ground floor, that's 10% of the entire building. So the bigger a building is, the more commercial space you have to have. We're also saying, and this speaks to the ground floor, no, I take that back. This speaks to the percentage, it speaks to how the commercial space may be used. We're saying that no more than 1/3 of the commercial floor area can be used for office or institutional uses. The idea here is to encourage retail, restaurants, not just offices. Okay, what projects would comply with this? 30 Haven is in lighter yellow because it would partially comply. And that's the reason why. I'll just leave it at that. 18 Woburn and 6 Chute Street would fully comply with those requirements. Pictures. All right. So the pictures here. Here are the developments that I showed you again. We'll go through which of these would comply with just these as-of-right requirements. Of these ones, none of them would comply with the as-of-right requirements. This would, I would say, they wouldn't comply with the as-of-right requirements. They'd have to come in with a different proposal. Of these ones, only 14 Chapin Avenue would comply. 14 Chapin Avenue, it's worth mentioning, is a 3-unit residential building. It doesn't have commercial, but it would comply with the dimensional requirements that we've suggested here. Alrighty, there's also a component here for as-of-right projects for affordability. What we've done here is we have, in order to get more affordability, we've lowered the threshold for projects rather than requiring a certain percentage of affordable at 12 units or greater. We've lowered that to projects of more than 8, which means that projects of 9+ units must have affordable units. We've also then allowed the town to grant a waiver from, since we lowered the threshold, and that is a very aggressive threshold, we've allowed the town to grant a waiver from that lower threshold. And that's only for projects consisting of fewer than 12. So that still sets the floor at 12, right? Okay. And then the other one is just saying when there's a fraction, we round up, because we're talking about on average. All right, the next category is for projects that seek waivers, and that does reflect the bulk of the amendments that you have before you in the 40R bylaw. A large part of the amendments that I will go through next are really to strengthen the conditions that must be met for waivers to be granted. We focused on this waiver section, and this is important to keep in mind, in acknowledgement of the fact that successful developments typically require trade-offs, and that allowing a flexible waiver-based approach to development versus a prescriptive one-size-fits-all will get us that combination of benefits that we're seeking and attract investment. I've not been on CPDC for all of these projects, but every one that I've been on for has required a waiver of one sort or another. So getting into this, any projects that are seeking any waivers, a waiver for anything, they have to meet certain objectives. What we had before is what you see in strike through there, the little 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those 5 lines. What we're adding is in the red box, and ultimately what we're doing is we're adding a little bit more clarity, a little bit more depth, more language about what we want to see when we're considering any waivers. We're moving toward, what are the objectives? A little bit more language around open space and connectivity, a little bit more language around commercial space, shared parking, or at least efficient use of parking. We really strengthened the language around high-performance building design. There is still preservation of historic properties, and then also we would give waivers for deeper affordability than what we're requiring. All right, a big category are projects that are seeking density waivers. That's often what people come to us for, is seeking a density waiver because our density is rather low. And I'll get into that as well. So you will see in a minute that we broke this down into a tiered system. Essentially, the higher density a developer wants, the more we want them to demonstrate benefits to the community. So all projects shall have high-performance building design. Again, fractions round up. There is a tiered requirement that I just talked about and I'm going to get into here, and waivers are at the discretion of CPDC. We are also, right now, we don't have a cap on density, and we cap the density at 65 units per acre, and in a moment, I'll explain how we got to that when we're talking about what meets what. Actually, I'll just mention it now. So 65, because I realize I may not be able to get to it here. The 65 units per acre, that 14 Chapin Avenue, the total residential one, the thing that I want everyone to remember about density is that density, units per acre does not necessarily mean units in a project. I may repeat this, so that 14 Chapin Avenue has a density of just a little bit over 20, and it's only 3 units. The 18 Woburn Street project is 6 units, and it has a density, it's on a very small lot, it's on a 4,000 square foot lot. It has a density, 6 units, has a density of 64 units per acre. So small building, I think it's a great project, but it had a high density because it's on such a small lot. Okay, tier one. Tier one, this would be the first level. If somebody's coming to us with a project that is just over 20 units per acre, 21 to 25, we want them to provide open space at grade, as well as private amenity space for the tenants. Or, and this is important, all of these, this is a menu option. So this is the first tier, this is the flexible part. They can say, okay, this is a historic property. We think it's important, and we might agree, that it's important to preserve the historic property. Or there might be a neat pathway opportunity or some other opportunity. So based on what the site offers, a developer can say, we might provide open space. We might provide commercial at a little bit over what the as-of-right requirement is at 12.5% of the gross floor area. We might provide a bit more parking, some visitor or guest parking, or I just mentioned this, and we might be preserving a historic building, something that's important to the community. This, as I go through this, the idea here is that as density gets higher, well, we'll just do this, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. So the next level is, okay, we're pausing here, right, on tier one. What are the properties, and I'll have pictures later, what are the properties that would meet just this tier one requirement? 14 Chapin Avenue would be able to be built as of right, remember? So it wouldn't have to seek this waiver, but it would still meet the 2 guest parking requirements. Postmark, Woburn, Haven would all meet this tier, 30 Haven where Pomplamoose is, would meet this tier 1 requirement. All right, the next tier, so if somebody wanted to have 26 to 40 units per acre, they would have to do something under tier 1, and then they would do something under this tier 2 menu. So this is where we talk about open space. They would do, an option is to do a little bit more. Here they could provide open space, not just provide any open space, but comprising 10% of the lot area. This is where we also enter into the area. There may be an option to do payment toward a fund that would need to be established that could go toward open space protection elsewhere. And we lay out, and thought went into this. This wasn't a dartboard. There was good thought about what the rate was. We established that. Another option that they could do is provide more commercial space than would be than is required as of right. They could also then add in a little bit more parking. So again, remember these themes. People wanted open space, parking, commercial. These are the things that people wanted. These escalate as they go up in density. What projects would comply with this tier 2? Oh, and by the way, anyhow, I'll go back. 14 Chapin Avenue, there was a different reason. It wasn't, tier 1 wasn't applicable, but we won't revisit that unless you have a question. So anyhow, these projects, 18 Woburn and 30 Haven would be the only projects of these that would comply as they are built. So for the other ones to be built as they were, even if they had gotten past the as of right, they would have had to demonstrate some more public benefits, some more of the benefits that we're talking about in order for CPDC to grant the waivers that they were seeking. All right, so the third level, the top level, because remember we're capping density at 65 units per acre, is again an escalation of the requirements. So remember, this is cumulative. For somebody to come in and get a waiver at 41 to 65 units per acre, they would have had to choose something from the tier 1 menu, something from the tier 2 menu, and then also something from one of these. So this steps up the open space a little bit, a higher percentage of the lot area, and here we're also saying it would be 50% is provided at grade or publicly and is publicly accessible. There is also the payment in lieu option. This one would also step up the percentage of gross floor area that would be required for commercial if they chose that option. If they chose an option about affordability, we'd still look for deeper or broader affordability. And if they chose parking as this option, we would require a share parking initiative, something that makes very efficient use of land space. All right, so which one would, as approved, which one would have met this criteria? Of these, only 18 Woburn Street would have met this requirement. All of the others, in order to get that level of density, would have had to do something a little bit different in order for CPDC to grant the waiver. All right, I have pictures again. So again, these are the ones, 14 Chapin, Postmark, 30 Haven, and 18 Woburn are the ones that would have met that Tier 1 requirement and been built. Moving on to the Tier 1 and 2, 14 Chapin would have really only needed the Tier 1, so it still would have made this. Postmark wouldn't have met the Tier 2 requirement. 30 Haven and 18 Woburn would have. Moving on, up to that Tier 3, and remember 18 Woburn is the one that I just said, even though it's only 6 units, it is 64 units per acre because the lot size is so small. Of all of the projects, it's 14 Chapin and 18 Woburn would have been able to be built, would have been able to be approved as they were under these amendments that we're proposing to you. All of the others that have been built successfully would not have, as they were designed and proposed and approved, would not have complied with the amendments that we have before you. There's another little asterisk right here that I'll just mention. I flagged which ones are over 65 units per acre because we're capping it. Rise 475, the one where Drew Stews is, Ace Flats, the one on Gould Street, and 6 Chute Street, which is the one across from the depot, are all over 65 units per acre. The Chronicle, which you'll see when it gets completed, was under 65 units per acre. Alrighty, the last category of amendments, this is where it gets really easy because this is the stuff where it's just, we had to do amendments for clarification so things would make sense, but I'll go through those. All right, I'll just go through what we did for alignment and clarification. We clarified some approval dates in our design standards. We added a definition of lot coverage because we didn't have in our 40R bylaw a definition of lot coverage. This exactly copies the definition in our zoning bylaw section 2, the one that has basically all of the underlying definitions. We also aligned our multifamily residential definition with what's required in Mass General Law and the zoning bylaw. We just did some alignment there. And we also did some alignment with the definition of what unreasonably impairing is with MGL is Mass General Law, so basically with the Chapter 40R requirements of state law. Okay, there were also some minor edits. That's what these are. You can see we basically did a formatting edit around where 45 feet goes so that we can read it more easily when we're working late at night. And then we did some clarification for the contiguous lots element. These other ones are truly under parking. This is the same information, we just reformatted it so that it would be easier to read. Alrighty, thank you. How did I do? We'll find out when we see what your questions are. And so now, Mr. Moderator, I think I turn it to you, right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Does the select board have a report or no? Okay, fine. Okay, it's now open to debate. Yes, right here.
Mark Ventura, Precinct 2. I know a while back we talked about, at a previous town meeting, we talked about max building height and shadow studies. Has any of that been considered so we don't create, dark corridors on our street during the afternoon and stuff of that nature?
I will speak partially, and I'll ask staff to fill in about the shadow study. We did not change the dimensional requirements around building height. You may recall back at the building survey, at the public survey portion of the presentation, what we heard is that people would be willing to exchange higher building heights for these benefits. So based on that information, we decided to not change the building height one. I do know we get and we review shadow studies with all the proposals, and I don't know, Julie, if you want to say anything about whether or not that's required, but we do review shadow studies.
Did that study include abutters of the smart growth district?
I can say that in the projects that I've reviewed, we look at shadow studies and how that affects abutters.
Another thing to consider maybe on, I know people seeking a waiver, you said passive house, LEED, green building, fantastic. I developed multifamily, I used to in a past life, some of these developments, which were all affordable, actually. We worked with a developer. How about some language requiring WBE or MBE requirements for those seeking? Is that, could we even do that? And if anyone doesn't know what that is, that's women business enterprise or minority business enterprise. That was a lot of requirements that we had dealt with.
I'd actually ask the planning staff if that's something that enters into zoning, if there's a requirement for who you hire to do your work.
I know it was part of I did some projects in Rhode Island where it was part of the funding from Rhode Island Housing. We had to have a certain percentage, et cetera. Thought it was a good idea.
Ms. Mercier?
Hi. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think I might turn that over to Town Council, if that's okay.
Ms. Freed?
Ivrea Freed, Town Council. We're unaware of any requirement under 40R, which is the statutory scheme that we're dealing with right here, that would require or certain developers to hire individuals.
And then with these higher density developments, has there been any studies on our infrastructure, our water and sewer system, traffic? We just did I don't know what you'd call it down Main Street where we went to a single lane. I can't remember the name of it. It had a cute name. Diet, yes, thank you. Road diet, or anything like that.
Ms. Mercier?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. That's a great question, Mr. Ventura. So when we expanded the Smart Growth District in 2017, we did a projection of how many units we would get under 20 units an acre, which is what Chapter 40R requires. And then we had to certify that we had the municipal infrastructure, the water and the sewer systems, to provide enough capacity for those additional units. In terms of traffic, the CPDC does require that projects that come to them do a traffic study and
Yes.
take into account all of the development that's currently happening and happened, as well as looking out a number of years into a build-out scenario.
Typical site plan review and all that fun stuff.
Typical.
And then right now, we just talked the other day that, our school system, the classes, some of them are, I don't want to say empty, but below capacity. I know when my kids went to elementary school, they were in classes of 24 students sometimes, which was extreme. And I know a lot of these developments for, older, citizens that, their kids are gone, left the nest or whatever. Some are single moms or single parents. I just think we need to do this. I think we need to look at the school system as well and make sure that's not burdened in tax. I know this has nothing to do with the building committee, but just something I'd like to mention. And I think the 25% compact spaces, that seems a little bit high from what I'm used to for even large-scale commercial developments and even residential developments. How did that number come up? That just seems pretty tight. I mean, not everyone drives a small car nowadays. They will be soon with the price of gas, but.
Ms. Mercier?
Thank you. So the CPDC has been in the habit, actually, of approving up to 33% of a garage as compact. And that was something that we had initially proposed in the bylaw. And through the public hearing process and feedback from residents, it got lowered to 25%.
And I think.
Next question.
And if I could just add there, from the CPDC considerations perspective, something that I always keep in mind is how much we're trying to fit on a lot, and just always remembering that the more space we require for parking, the less there is for retail, the less there is for open space. And I can say that went into the consideration of, okay, about where do we think we want to land on the compact spaces.
And then these obviously benefit the local businesses because it's foot traffic and stuff. And what else was I going to say? Maybe it'll come to mind. I think I've gone through everything. Oh, just out of curiosity, out of the latest developments that you highlighted, how many affordable units did we gain from those? What's the percentage? Was it?
We're a little over 10% right now, and wasn't it about 168 units or something like that? I have it in my notes. I meant to say it.
Yeah, we are a little over 10% now.
But we're a little bit over 10%.
But all these developments that got put in added some of them are pretty significant. Overall, out of those half a dozen projects, how many affordable units did we gain from those?
Ms. Mercier?
Thank you, Andrew, my right-hand man. Okay, so 4 of our recent 40R projects, Postmark, Ace Flats, Rise 475, and the recently approved Chute Street project, have contributed 125 units to the town's subsidized housing.
So pretty
inventory.
significant. Someone have a question?
Are you all set?
Yeah, I'm all set.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Downing?
Would you like the presentation or the motion?
I'm Mary Ann Downing, Precinct 4. I guess I'm looking at what I have in the warrant, your definition. So I have a question about the meaning of some terms in there. What does compatible mean, and what do residential uses mean? And I'm asking because I don't know whether existing residential uses includes any mixed uses that are within the 40R or just purely residential zones. And where I'm going with this, with really all of my comments, is thinking about what's happening with the proposed development at 128 Tire next to Rise 475, because you have 0 setback and a development. You allowed a development with windows on the side, right, knowing that another 40R could be built right next to it, next to those windows. So I'm just wondering if that kind of situation arises again, does that mean that that's incompatible with the building? So tell me what you mean by compatible, and tell me what you mean by a residential use.
Ms. Mercier?
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Downing. That's a great question. So when we were discussing this at the CPDC hearing, the focus for residential use was actually on the single, the 2-family, and the 3-family. But what the CPDC intent with this would be to consider the impact on any abutting property, right, and to look at compatibility with any abutting property. In terms of how to handle a situation like the Rise 475, which is pretty close to the lot line with windows, and then the proposed development before CPDC, it's actually a little bit potentially out of school to talk about a project that's currently
Right, I'm just saying like that kind of situation is going to happen again, right. I would imagine.
So the CPDC looks at each project on its own merits on the lot that it's proposed on, and the zoning that typically is in place is zoning for a zone, right? Not zoning based on whatever the use is next door. So they're really looking at the projects on their own merits, how they fit on the lot, and at the time of the Rise 475 project, there wasn't anything proposed on the 128 Tire site besides what was already there. And so that's the abutter that they were considering at that time.
But I mean, you have this entire zone, so I guess, maybe it was on the Rise 475 developer to say, okay, I'm assuming the risk that something is going to come in next to me because zoning allows it. But I guess that's where we're leaving a lot of discretion up to the CPDC. I get concerned about that. And something you said made me think of, I had a proposed amendment to another part. But if you can go to the transitional area under your definition section, right at the end of where your changes are, you're saying is directly abutting a lot containing a single-family, two-family, or three-family dwelling. And I'm wondering whether you might consider either adding or just changing after single-family or multi-family dwelling, because then that might cover, potential mixed-use buildings. Like, why limit it to three-family? Because we're going to run into this situation as, you just showed us like 8 different 40Rs, and potentially any existing downtown business could be turned into something. So my proposed amendment would be maybe either change three-family to multi-family dwelling, or, delete the or, put an after three-family dwelling, comma, or multi-family dwelling. So I guess is that a motion?
Which way are you leaning? It's your motion.
Yes.
Yes. Which way would
I've
you?
never done this before.
Oh.
So I guess two-family, single-family, two-family, maybe just change three-family to multi-family.
Okay, can we have that put up on the screen?
And if there's something I'm missing about what the impact of changing that to multifamily from three-family, I'm open to hearing it.
Ms. Klisch?
Ms. Mercier may have something else to add, but I will say, from my perspective as being on CPDC, is that my concern is that this would effectively turn the entire downtown smart growth district into a transitional area, right? Because we are having multifamily. You asked a very good question about how do we consider compatibility. It's not defined. I would be concerned about defining compatibility because it would kind of box us in from the type of negotiation that needs to happen. But I do know that when we consider things, we consider, all right, what's the light to the neighbors? What is the style? There's so many factors that go into compatibility that we do consider that. And my concern here is that it would become very difficult to distinguish what's a transitional area and what's not.
Okay, well, I can withdraw that, but I don't understand if we're putting in so much residential, what do we define to be residential? Does a mixed use that's 90% residential count as residential?
Residential use is defined is in the definitions.
It's just purely residential?
Ms. Freed, do you have a comment?
Thank you. Ivrea Freed, Town Council. Residential use is defined currently in the zoning. I don't know if we can
Was it in the?
put it up, but it's defined as a building or part of a building containing dwelling units as defined herein, and parking that is accessory to the dwelling units. So to address the questions that have come up, it does include mixed-use developments within that term.
Okay, so then it already is, all of the 40R is a transitional area then? If it has residential in it? Or any 40R that has a building already there
Ms. Mercy?
becomes residential?
I'm sorry, can you say that last part again?
So, based on what Town Council just read, a residential is any building that contains a residential unit. So therefore, all of those 40R buildings that you showed, any building built in 40R is going to be residential because it contains residential units.
I believe that that's correct. It would be a partially residential building. I think that with this definition of transitional area, that's why we're limiting it to 1 family, 2 family, and 3 family, so that it doesn't end up making the entire district a transitional area. The term residential use was, I think, in the first piece that you had mentioned earlier. So do you mind going back to that?
Oh, that number 10, yeah.
Right. So there's a little bit of a difference there.
So that existing residential uses then includes the 40R?
So that would include residential uses as defined, right?
Okay, then I can withdraw my other amendment if the CPDC, it's going to take that into account, because I guess, we're figuring out what compatible means, but I mean, blocking off window access and deck access just doesn't seem that would be a great, it wouldn't be compatible to me. Okay, that's all.
So
Thank
you're
you.
withdrawing your?
Yes, I'm withdrawing.
Okay.
I'm withdrawing it now that I understand
Okay.
40R
We
is
had no second,
residential.
so that's fine.
Thank you.
Mr. Talbot?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dave Talbot, Precinct 5. I had an amendment that I sent in to the town clerk earlier today. I was wondering if I could bring that up. And
Are we able to put that on the screen? I think so.
also have
Is that it? Is this your amendment? Just make sure we have the right one. Okay. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Talbot?
putting 2 photos up that I also sent in. There's only, got it. Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Is it okay to be up here?
Yes.
Thank you. As he's getting the pictures in, thank you, everybody. My name is Dave Talbot. I'm Dave Talbot, Precinct 5. Thank you, everybody. Just as a preamble, I want to thank the CPDC for the great work they did here. This is a very difficult problem, and there's been a lot of good progress downtown. I and others have expressed some concerns and have minor tweaks to propose, but we all support downtown growth, mixed use, and the discussion I want to offer tonight, I will offer to keep it simple in the context of the Chute Street project. One, the new zoning, the revisions propose a maximum of 65 units per acre as a cap on what could be built downtown. Obviously, that's very dense. The amendment that I'm proposing is to make that be 50 units as a cap per acre. Mindful, again, that the 40R law only requires 20 units per acre to be conforming with 40R zoning. And I'll tell you why the difference of 65 down to 50 is significant. We can skip past this definition. I'll get to why this definition is needed. The reason, and just briefly, the definition here is units can be a studio, or it can be a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, or a 3-bedroom. So just counting in terms of units isn't all that helpful unless you know kind of a rough scale of what's being proposed. I want to just describe what's going on with the Chute Street project. You all, can you put the picture up? Is it up? Thank you very much. You all know this humble building, a 1-story building at the corner of Chute and High. This is a building that's 1-story and has 6 businesses in it. Now, when the downtown smart growth this zone was first proposed, the argument then and now was this is going to promote downtown vitality and walkable and businesses and thriving commercial spaces as part of it. You have 6 businesses in this building right now, and you all know what they are. There's a dry cleaner, there's a laundromat, there's a food takeout place, and of course the Last Corner restaurant. There's 6 altogether there. This building is going to be torn down now as a result of the most recent project approval. And what's going to go up? Can you go to the next slide, please? This is the view from Chute Street. It may be slightly different in the tweaks from this because this is a little bit earlier and it's been tweaked. It might not be exactly this, but it's very close to this. And that whole first facade you see there is actually, much of what's back there is a parking garage. And there's only going to be 2 businesses in the resulting building, despite the fact that we've got this big new dense zoning. So you're going from 6 businesses to 4. So I would argue that this is an unintended consequence of the zoning, is that we're actually, in some cases, going to lose businesses. Now you say, well, how could this be? You know, how could it be that we've done this very dense zoning, and yet now we're losing businesses at this very site? And the reason is the number of residential units, quite simply. This building is going to support, now this is a 0.4 acre site, give or take. As somebody knows, it's slightly more than that. Somebody can correct me, but it's roughly 0.4 acre. There's going to be 29 units of housing on top of the first floor, which by any measure is a lot. Now I think that works out to approximately the 65 units an acre that we're talking about tonight. Somebody else can correct the math again, but it's 29 units on a half an acre. On an acre, that would be roughly 65. Again, somebody can correct me if it's up or down by one. And because you have 29 units of housing, there needs to be parking as part of the formula. And others may disagree about tweaking the formula, but nevertheless, when you have 29 units of housing, you have to have parking. And that's why the whole first floor has to be a parking garage in order to support the required parking for all those units. And as a result, what the developers do is they're squeezing out the first floor, they're squeezing out the commercial space. And that is, and I think, and I've heard a lot at the CPDC meetings, is an unintended consequence. Now, if you reduce it down to 50, you're still going to, a project like this, again, rough numbers, he'd still be able to build 20 units of housing on a 0.4 acre site. And I would just appeal to common sense that that's got to be economical. You'll hear from developers saying, oh, no, oh, no, I can't do that. But I mean, I would like to see evidence that building 20 units of housing on a 0.4 acre site is not economically viable, especially when it's on top and they're also getting some retail revenues there. So that's why I feel like this amendment down to 50 as an absolute cap would have prevented something as severe as the loss of businesses at the Chute Street building. It would have been fewer parking spaces, I think roughly 10 fewer, give or take, and that would be the equivalent amount of space. Maybe there'd be a third business in there. So the amendment is, now again, during the CPDC, and there was a few of us that sat through all the hearings, and boy, these CPDC, I'm on another board, but boy, these CPDC members, they work some long hours. They get in there at 7:30, they're there till 1 a.m. It's unbelievable what they do. So I and a few others were in for a lot of these meetings, watching this happen. And one of the things we saw happen was some members were pushing back and saying, hey, I think you should reduce the number of units. I think this was originally proposed at 33, give or take. And over the years, with much, protestation, they finally went down to 29 as a concession. But what they did was the building didn't really get much smaller, if at all, because they simply increased the bedroom count on the number of units they were doing. They ended up with more 2 bedrooms and fewer 1 bedrooms, so the massing was the same, which is why, in addition to proposing a cap at 50 units, I'm proposing that we need to say, what do we mean by units when we're capping it at a certain number? Because again, if 50 units of a studio is different than 50 units of 3 bedrooms. So you got to kind of say, well, what do we mean? So this long-winded stuff that I had there, which I apologize for it being so long-winded, the language up in the front there, if you can put that back up, would basically say unit means an average of 1.5 bedrooms, and then, so that would be for like a project at 50 units that he could have, hold on a second, I lost my train of thought. That a 50 unit with an average of 1.5 units would be 75 bedrooms, thank you. So it would be, I think what I came up with was it would be 25 1 bedrooms and 25 2 bedrooms. That's what I was trying to bring out of my brain there. So then you'd have 20, so like this, so this developer, for example, if this amendment were to pass, would be able to say, okay, I'll keep it at 50, at the equivalent of 50 units, because he's got 0.4 acre. But if it was a full acre site, am I losing people? That if it was a 1 acre site, it would be allowed 50 units of 25 two-bedrooms and 25 one-bedrooms. Or they could mix it around and say more one-bedrooms, a couple three-bedrooms, more two-bedrooms, and some one. You get where I'm going with this. But the cap would be 50, but the bedroom count would be based on the 1.5. So that's why I've added a definition up here to say that when we're counting this cap, we have to say what it is we're referring to, and that the 1.5 bedrooms is the average. So that's there. Now, if somebody says we're not allowed to change a definition because the definition wasn't edited as part of this, then that could be moved down to where the cap of 50 is proposed, which is lower down in the where the tiers that Heather was discussing. There's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, which are very interesting ideas. And tier 3 would go from being capped at 65 to being capped at 50. And then if you can't put the definition there, you could squeeze it in down there to say what we mean by that is an average of 1.5 bedroom. So that's the gist of what I wanted to communicate tonight. I hope that was clear. And was that satisfactory in terms of the amendment and the explanation?
Okay, yep. Is there a second? Second. Now, at this point, all discussion turns to the proposed amendment until we have taken a vote on it. Mr. DeRezzo?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Tony DeRezzo, Precinct 2 and Associate CPDC member. Dave attended many of the meetings. I thank you for your input. I'm going to recommend against this motion for a couple of reasons. Number one, the project that Dave is referring to was actually at 70 units per acre. It's not 65. But number two, the reason you're getting almost any commercial development here is because only projects with commercial development are allowed to go up to 45 feet. So what happens is you get an extra story when the developer is building, which are more units. On Chute Street, he could have put in his 70 units per acre and not had any commercial. They may have been smaller units, they may have been fewer. The way to get the commercial portion of that was we allow them to go up in feet, which gives them a few more units that they can squeeze onto the lot, and that's where they make their money. They're not making their money on commercial. When a two-bedroom is running at $700,000 in Reading, that's what they want to build. So Dave, I understand what you're trying to do, but also understand that even with your definitions, if he has a 1.5 or two-bedroom, that's 1,200 square feet versus 800 square feet. That would still be one unit, and it wouldn't make any change. Thank you.
Ms. Klisch?
Thank you, Tony. I am also just going to speak briefly to and thank you, Dave, for your presentation, to this amendment. I would also recommend against it for a few reasons. Thank you, and I'm speaking slowly because I was waiting for staff to pull up this chart, which shows, if I'll just orient you to it, this shows all of the projects that we've just talked about, and under the density column, the first column, the units per acre, and that's where you can see that 6 Chute Street was rounded up at 71 units per acre. The thing that is interesting to me here, and I paid a lot of attention to this. Sorry, I realized it was off the mic. I paid a lot of attention to this as we were coming up with the parameters, where the very small, some of the smallest ones, not by density, but by units, that 18 Woburn Street, which is 6 units, is 63 units per acre. We also have the Chronicle, which will be a lower building. It has 7 units. It is 53.5 units per acre. My point is here is that if we lower that density, the units per acre, too far, we really, I would be very concerned about getting even a small number of units on the smaller lots Both of those were lots that were vacant. One was truly vacant. The building had burnt down. I would be very concerned about being able to redevelop lots that have buildings that have gone empty and lots that are vacant when they're small. I'll also, another comment that I have is on capping the bedrooms at 1.5. I can't speak for all of CPDC. I'm only coming from my own personal position here. I would be very concerned about that, about limiting essentially the size of a family unit, however that's defined, through our bylaw. That to me just simply doesn't feel right. I actually don't know if DHCD, if that would be allowed by state. I don't know if RIA has a perspective on that, if council has a perspective on that. But that to me feels like I wouldn't feel good about doing that.
Thank you. Mr. Talbot?
Thank you very much for those comments. Just a couple things, and I forgot to mention. Mike, the mic. Thanks again. Just a couple quick reactions. This whole process started with a common desire in the community to bring the scale of these buildings down a notch. I think going down to 50 units per acre, 50 units per acre, again, think of that, how big that number is, from 65, would tend to do that. And you see here that Chute is 70 units, so this brings it down to 50. So we did come into this wanting a wide spectrum of opinion to just scale things down a bit. And secondly, that we wanted more open space, and we have parking issues downtown. By shrinking them a little bit, we're also tending to solve for some of those other problems. It makes it easier to address some of those other goals that were mentioned in Heather's presentation. So that's the gist of it. Now, as to regulating the number of units, this project as approved is 9 two-bedrooms and 21 bedrooms. Am I correct? So it is. That's what it is. It's 9 two-bedrooms and 21 bedrooms. So under how I've proposed it, he would be able to build the equivalent at 50 units an acre of I'm losing my thread again, but he would be able to build relatively more two-bedrooms and would be incentivized to build more larger units because he'd be capped as to the number of units at a lower number. He would be incentivized to have more that have extra bedrooms, which means a more different mix of people coming in other than studio and one bedrooms. And I think that is more amenable to family units. So thank you very much.
Ms. Klisch?
Council has something also, but I will just point out, going back to this chart here, to the point of bringing it down a notch, that is actually exactly what we intended to do with the bylaw, where capping it at 65 instead of having a cap. 1, 2, 3, 4, remember, a full half of the projects that have been approved, maybe that's not half, but 30 Haven, Ace Flats, Rise 475, and Chute Street would have all had to be built at a lower density. None of them would have, we are bringing those types of buildings exactly down a notch. They would not have complied. And council had something else also. In a minute.
Ms. Freed?
Sorry, thank you very much. Ivrea Freed, Town Council. Just a few points. It doesn't seem an obvious conflict to have a bedroom makeup cap with 40R. So we can't say that DHCD would disapprove it, but whenever you look at a 40R bylaw, DHCD needs to approve all of the provisions, and this is definitely something we think they would have questions about, and we would want to have that conversation with them. We're not aware of any community that has a similar structure, so it's not something we can say DHCD has previously approved. We also want to point out that the MBTA communities a housing initiative law that was recently passed is still, the regulations are still being developed under that. But in order for your district to count to the required density that you need to have by law, you need to have housing suitable for families. And there's draft definitions which say that you can't restrict the number of bedrooms or the size of those bedrooms. And so again, I can't say one way or another whether those regulations are going to be promulgated or whether this restriction would be viewed as in conflict with that, but these are definitely discussions that DHCD is currently actively having. And if this was to pass, town meeting tonight, I think DHCD would look critically at it before issuing its opinion.
Further discussion? Ms. Lestrade?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Cheryl Lestrade, Precinct 5. So I have two questions. The unit that we're discussing currently, is this a condo unit or is this apartment? Because that clearly is quite different.
Ms. Klisch?
It is rental. I guess I would also make the point that
Condo or apartment?
It's rental. It is apartment. And I would also add to the point that when CPDC is reviewing these, whether or not they are owned or rented is not part of our calculus. It's not what we're reviewing.
I'm inquiring because it does matter, because when we are talking about sizing and number of units and costs of living and affordable living, I'm inquiring because the cost of living for a condo versus the cost of living for an apartment is clearly different.
Pardon me, if I may. I misunderstood your question. I thought you were talking about the Chute Street project that Mr. Talbot was talking about. When
Yes.
we're talking about a unit, it may either be owned or rented. It is
No,
just
I'm talking about the project that he is
that project was
put on the
rentals.
table. It's apartment rentals?
Yes.
Okay. The other question is, we're talking about outdoor space. Has anyone thought about using outdoor space as far as rooftop outdoor space so that we're not confining just the usage of space, that we could fill those places with units as opposed to extending the units out and having the rooftop being the outdoor space?
Ms. Klisch?
Yes, that would be included under the definition.
Have we looked at that, though, as part of their, the contractor's development?
In my time, there was one project that came proposing rooftop space, and it ended up getting changed, but it has been considered, and it might be again.
Okay, because, I mean, then we could still have a certain number of units and not utilize as much space, because then the outdoor space would be part of the building itself as opposed to an additional, and it would also then litigate the parking and, again, the amount of space that we are using, and still allow us the amount of units that we are asking, or that you all are asking for.
Ms. Klisch?
I've had the pleasure of most recently moving to the town, so when I was looking, a lot of these apartment buildings that are going up, yes, as beautiful as they are on the outside, they are clearly different in space and structure, and so I'd like us to take a look at that when we are allowing developers to come in, because the beauty of this community is being lost in these huge buildings being built. They're taking up a lot of the space, they're taking up a lot of the business space, and it's losing the beauty. Yes, we want people to come in, but we also want to maintain some beauty to our community that is not full of apartment buildings. Because if I wanted to live in New York City, that's where I'd live, because, you know, that's what's going to end up starting to happen.
I don't need to comment.
Further discussion? Mr. Sasso?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Sasso, Precinct 2. Just a couple questions. If you could go back to the slide that you were presenting regarding some of the spaces and the number of units, and that one there. Thank you. So you indicated 18 Woburn and the Chronicle, given the densities, wouldn't have been built, but I guess the first question is, well, they were both under 6,000 square feet, so under the new bylaw, they wouldn't have been built anyhow. Is that correct?
They would have had to find a waiver in order to be built.
They would have had to find a waiver. And also, can you tell me for the I think it's the Chute Street project right now, if it was to be built under the new bylaw, wouldn't it require at least a 10% commercial? How does that unit? How does that? As Mr. Talbot was saying, there's a smaller number of business units in there right now. What would that have converted to under the new bylaw?
I'm sorry, which project were you talking about?
The Chute Street.
Oh, yes, right, that would have, there it is. Yes, so that one has 10% is commercial.
So it does, okay, so then it is actually being, it would satisfy under the new approach, it would satisfy that requirement.
That one, yes.
Okay. I was going to ask the question about how DHCD was going to address the definition of units. I think, and unfortunately, it's probably not something we want to step our feet into, I would suspect, although I'm not adverse to the limit to 50 as long as we are under the cap of what DHCD wants in the 40R district. But I'll leave it at that. And I have other questions, but I'll follow up after this amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion? Yes, up on the aisle. Yes.
Good evening, David Panett, Precinct 1. I'd like to get back to the amendment, please, since that's what we were discussing. And under the proposed amendment to go from 65 to 50, you were going to reduce the number of units by 23%. And what I'd like to actually know, if you reduce by 23% the number of units, how many of these developments that we're actually getting in town are actually going to be then non-economically viable? I do recall in one of the CPDC meetings, specifically with the developer of the Chute Street project, when the number of units were being requested to be reduced, that developer said that it would not be economically viable. So if you actually reduce that further by 23%, would that developer just go away and say, I'm out, can't do it, the money's not there?
Ms. Mercier?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, Mr. Panett. So, while I can't really discuss economic viability because I'm not a developer, I can tell you, like, of the projects that we have approved and constructed or just approved in the 40R district, there are a number of them that would be, if we had a cap on density of 50 units an acre, would not have been able to happen unless they made some significant changes to their design. So the slide behind me actually illustrates in the third column, the units per acre of the projects. So you can see the postmark is 52 units an acre, so that would not have been able to be constructed as designed. A number of them. I guess maybe it's easier if I tell you which ones would have been under 50 units an acre. So the 14 Chapin Avenue, that's the only one.
Thank you. Further discussion? Mr. Berman?
Point of order, Mr. Moderator.
Point of order.
For old eyes, I can't read the font of the amendment. I can't read the ink color of the amendment. It's too pale, and the chart is small. So if we could,
Is it possible to change the color?
is it possible to darken the color, increase the font size? Thank you.
Didn't change it. Is that better, or yeah, actually highlighting yellow is a good idea? And put it in black. Okay, thank you, Mr. Byrne. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Barry Berman, Precinct 6. I finance some of these for a living, and while I can't tell you, a certain level of number of units that's going to be, if you go under a certain amount, that it's viable or not, a lot of that depends on acquisition costs, type of units, all that kind of stuff. I do know that when we have a 45-foot height limit, now a new setback that kind of crunches it in, and a limitation of units, that's starting to feel to me, maybe developers will look elsewhere. Again, not saying it definitively, but it's starting to kind of have that feel as we start to as we start to kind of constrain this. I think one of the beauties of this zoning amendment, as CPDC and staff, and obviously a lot of people who participated, the beauty of this is that you are giving developers the ability to participate in the conversation. It is not prescriptive. So if you have, for example, a 65 per acre unit, they're going to have to give something back that we think is valuable. That, as you've defined in the amendment, could be open space, it could be affordability, it could be parking, it could be a number of those things that may not be able to have happened if not for the density. So to artificially kind of put it at 50, to me seems, it doesn't feel right. I don't mind the 65, and some of that, by the way, is just a number. I think you had, Ms. Klisch, you had said something that one of the smaller units is 65, and it's 3 acres because it's on a small lot. So the units per acre to me is not really a number that we should really kind of hang our hat on. It's kind of how it looks and fits in with the other parts of the district and the other projects that have already been done. So I'm going to be opposed to the amendment for that, because I think anything that gives CPDC and the town less leverage, less ability to negotiate, I think is harmful. The whole point of this is that we're able to trade off for the things that we think are important. The other part of it that feels wrong to me is sort of defining a unit, 1.5 bedrooms. I think, from a community, we want to welcome all types of family, all types of housing, opportunities. And I think if we define a unit as 1.5, the developers are going to start to game it, and you may wind up having a lot more units of smaller things, and that's not what we want. I think, and again, the legal thing, I don't know the state would go for that. So for those reasons, I think I'd like to keep it at the 65, knowing that a lot of work and time and effort went into sort of calculating this, and the ability to be able to have leverage and a tool and just a conversation and make developers part of the solution is part of why I really like the stuff that you've done over the last few months. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Herrick?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Karen Herrick, Precinct 8. Just a quick question for CPDC, and I've seen some of these really long meetings, and I understand that you do have, in regards to the amendment and questions of are projects going to be viable with reduced density. So I understand that the CPDC has the ability to ask the developer to open the books and show them the viability. And I'm just wondering if any of these projects they've done that, or the developers seem willing to do that. Because to some of the previous speakers' comments, these are for-profit businesses. So if we have that tool within our wheelhouse, I'd like to see us using it. But I'd like to be honest about how many of these developers are willing to actually come to the table and be honest.
Ms. Klisch, did you have a comment?
Thank you. We were debating who was going to respond to this because I haven't been with all of the projects. I haven't been on CPDC for all of the projects that we presented to you. We did ask a developer to open their books. They gave us partial books, and they did reduce their density a little bit. It did help with the negotiation, I would say, to say, really, we need to have a demonstration of what's really viable and at least get close to a demonstration of that. But we do have the ability to do that. If we exercise that ability, we also would need to be sure that we have and acquire the resources to interpret what they give us correctly.
Further discussion? The woman in the red fourth row here? Yes.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sarah Brucolacchio, Precinct 4.
didn't recognize you.
Can you hear me? David, would you consider eliminating the 1.5 bedrooms and going to 60? I just feel like we have to bring this down somehow. At every single meeting, every single workshop, massing was like number one. 65, it was like something. and we just want a little something more. We just need a little something more, because it's too much. It's something everybody says, they're too big, the massing is too big, and I think we can compromise here. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
Mr. Talbot, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would propose, first of all, breaking this into two motions, because there's people concerned about the 1.5 and about the number, and they're related, but they're two different things. So for one, I would suggest that it be done as two different votes. I just want to clarify to Mr. Berman's question that it's not saying the units have to be 1.5 bedrooms. It's saying that on average, that's what is used to calculate this cap. Otherwise, like 50 units an acre, is that 50 studio apartments, or is it 50 three-bedroom apartments? It's two completely different scales of what the buildings would be. That's why I'm saying, how do we know what this actually means with respect to the overall size of the buildings, which is one of the concerns a lot of people have. So in fact, what it would do with Shoot is that would increase the number. It would make the developer increase the number of his 2 bedrooms relative to what he's actually building, which is 9 2-bedrooms and 20 1-bedrooms. So he would increase relatively his number of 2 bedrooms under this scheme. Nevertheless, if it's confusing or it's problematic legally or people are worried about it, keep it as a separate amendment. I think we need some kind of definition. And on the 60, I guess I could amend my motion to say, I don't know, sure, 60. I mean, it's a small change, but so yes, let's consider 60 to be what my motion is. And okay, I'm getting shaken heads here. I don't know. I'm just taking feedback from the floor here.
Yeah, we need an exact motion to discuss it.
My motion is, I think 50 is a good number. We're losing 4 out of 6 businesses at Chute Street. That's the example I tried to explain. This is a really, really complicated, very, very complicated zoning bylaw. And we see what it did with Chute Street. And I'm just saying that that's not good for downtown vitality to lose small businesses. I don't think it is. It's done at the expense of too many units above it. So I will amend to say 55, cap it at 55 per acre. And just think about how many units that is, 55 units of housing per acre. If a developer comes and says that, oh, I can't do that, come on. What he might have to do is go back and renegotiate his land purchase price, which is what would likely happen because these deals are all tied to what he's acquiring the property for. So if he can only get 5 units less, he'll renegotiate a lower purchase price. So that's what will happen. That's my take on it. So I will say my amendment is 55 per acre at capping the whole thing at that, and keep these as 2 separate.
Where are you dividing the motions?
That the definition of saying that a unit shall consist for the purposes of this calculation, that we shall say 1.5 bedrooms is the average of the number of bedrooms for these units. That's all that says. So like, it could be a bunch of 3 bedrooms and a bunch of 1 bedrooms adding up to an average of 1.5 bedrooms. So that's one motion, is this definition of how you're counting units. And the second one is capping the total projects at 55, which, by the way, is I think what the post office project is. That's about.
No.
This is 50. Is it 55 or?
Yeah, but 55. So that's what I'd like to just say one last thing. There were 3 or 4 public hearings, and not for this at CPDC. Very few people attended. I and about 4 others did, and we stuck it out till the bitter end. Not one time in those 4 public hearings did any landowner or developer come in to complain about these being onerous. I think these are not, as proposed, what's happening here is not something that developers are objecting to. None of them showed up at the public hearings.
Okay, Mr. Talbot, one more time. Just exactly where are the 2 motions being divided?
One motion is for adding this definition of what it means when we say 1.5 units on average for this cap. It just means it's an average of all the units. Some are 2 bedrooms, some are 1, some are 3.
So in your motion, where does it begin and end?
Well, that definition there is 1. Adding that definition is 1 suggested amendment. And then the cap is lower down when you're in the tiers.
Where she is now?
The tier 3 is capped at 55 instead of 65. Those are the 2 motions.
Oh, okay. So that's this here is the second motion, the one that's up on the screen now?
The tiers would be capped at 55. I think you need the definition, but to the wisdom of town meeting.
Okay, first, is there any objection to him changing the number? That's the only thing I want to concern right now. Okay, I will allow you, Ms. Freed.
Sorry, I just want to point out, There's nothing legally wrong with separating it into two motions, but we do need to change the language because the definition of dwelling unit as proposed includes the 50 unit per acre reference, sorry, the 55 now unit per acre. So we would need to first vote it as 65 units per acre, and then the second would be to, if this is adopted, then amend this as well to read 55. So it necessarily would just need to be changed if you're going to split it.
That's going to make these projects even bigger because, I don't know. I guess what I would say is decide on the cap first. If you like the different limit of 55, then we would consider this other one second, and that I would want to withdraw the motion on the 1.5 because I did that with the cap in mind. If you do that to 65, you're going to, and you have 1.5, you're going to end up with larger buildings. That's my take on it. So I think you should go with the number first. If it passes, then consider this one and pass it or reject it. But I would withdraw the definitional piece if the first motion on the numbers does not pass. I would not want to consider this one.
Okay, I will do that, and we will vote on the
number first.
The number first, yes. Just,
Okay,
I think it's smoother. Ms. Klisch, did you have a comment?
Sure, thanks again. Couple of points, if I can remember them in order. One is to also remember that these are comprehensive bylaw amendments that we're proposing. And to the point of commercial space, we're also proposing a minimum commercial space, and then as the tiers go up, an option, remember, an option is to have a greater percentage of space. So depending on what a building does, and remember, the project Chute Street that Mr. Talbot is discussing would not have met any of this. They would have had to do they would have had to do some combination of things in order to be approved. The other thing, if you could bring up that table, the table again, it's so useful. I'll point out, yes, so Postmark was 52 units per acre. There is something else, it's not on this one, but 18 Woburn Street, that small one that has 4 units and it is at 63 units per acre. I'll point out that one also has the entire first floor is, there it is. It is, the entire ground floor is commercial, so it's 36% commercial. My point is, oh, sorry, thank you. 28, a third, about almost a third, but the entire first floor is all commercial. My point is, remember I said that CPDC was taking community input and also lessons learned? As we put this kind of ecosystem of amendments together, we were looking at this full suite and wanting to be sure that we incentivize redevelopment of properties that are needing redevelopment without really quashing that while still stepping it back. And I guess I would still recommend against this because it probably steps it back a little bit too much.
Further discussion? Mr. O'Rourke?
Tom O'Rourke, Precinct 2. Again, applaud the effort and time that's gone into this whole discussion over the past several months. I just wonder, is there any feedback from the developers? I know David mentioned that not during the meetings that were held, but do we know sort of in total what this looks like to developers?
Ms. Mercier?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. So, well, it may be true that no developers were actually present during the specific CPDC hearing process. During our Your Downtown initiative that lasted for 6 to 8 months, we did have a panel of developers present and talk about the different trade-offs that they make when they're assessing and evaluating sites for redevelopment. And the big takeaway for me from that night was the flexibility really is the key, right? So we took what we heard, that flexibility is important and prescriptive zoning is really difficult. And we look to make amendments, the waiver amendments, where, you know, they can choose from each tier which thing they want to try to comply with, right? So they're looking at the site, they're looking at the different constraints the site might have, they're looking at the abutting uses, and they're figuring out what works for that site. And then they're coming to CPDC, and it's a negotiation for community benefits in exchange for density. So that's why the bylaw is a flexible approach. We have had some recent feedback since these amendments evolved over time. The hearing opened in December, and the amendments look very different than they did after 4 really long nights of the public hearing. And so now that they're more sure, I guess, and they were put in the warrant and they're here for town meeting, developers have been looking at them, and we have had recent feedback that they are, to these developers on the specific sites they're looking at, unworkable.
Good, and just a quick follow-up. Any other towns using this tiered approach?
So I love that question, because what I've learned, and I've learned a lot through this process, dealing with 40R and dealing with the state, is that Reading blazes all trails 40R. We are a model 40R community. We are the community that proposes all the new ideas, and DHCD tells us, you know, other communities ask them what we're doing so they can see how they can modify their own bylaws. So no other community is taking this approach to density waivers in the 40R district.
Thank you.
I will point out that I'm allowing discussion on both halves of Mr. Talbot's proposed amendment, but we will vote on them separately. The hand in the back? Yes.
Hi, Anne Marie Corey, Precinct 5. Heather, I just, my question is, I think you answered it. Essentially, what I think I'm hearing is that if we had had these amendments in place, that the proposed development at Chute Street would not necessarily have been allowed to be put together the way it is currently, because we would have had more leverage with the tiered system. Is that what you were trying to explain? Because essentially, if I think that's what I was hearing. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct. The combination of the cap on density, which we're proposing at 65, plus the tiered approach for waivers, the waivers that the density waiver that they would have needed, even if they were at 65, they would have had to have a thing from an item from each of those tiers, which is not what the project is in that form, right? So they would have had to do something different.
Right, so if we had decided that we were prioritizing the commercial space, those businesses, that we wanted to preserve space for those particular businesses to be able to remain, potentially we would have had leverage to negotiate that? Does that sound reasonable? Because I think that's where a lot of the energy is coming on this project, right, at this amendment, is that we have established businesses that are being forced out.
Where we would have had some leverage, what would have been part of the discussion, is something around the square footage for commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Tenancy of the building is something different. There are mechanisms to address that, I think, but that's not what was under CPDC's purview, unfortunately.
Sure. No,
we were focused on the square footage
Sorry, I didn't
by
mean
law.
to step on you, but yes, essentially saying we want the square footage available. Okay, thank you.
Okay, further discussion on the proposed amendment? Mr. Arena?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Arena, Precinct 1. A couple of questions. At the 55-unit density proposal that Mr. Talbot made, there's still a waiver available in the language. Is that true? You could increase beyond that subject to a waiver, true?
Ms. Mercier?
Thank you, Mr. Arena. So a developer can request a waiver from anything in the 40R bylaw with the exception of the state affordability requirement.
Thank you. And the 40R zoning is by right. In other words, there's no discretion. Once a developer comes in and is compliant with 40R, it's automatic.
It's by right to the extent that waivers are not being requested.
Okay. Did CPDC give any, I'm struck by the vignette that Mr. DeRiso mentioned about 6 businesses vacating Chute Street. I was wondering if CPDC gave any thought to potentially boosting the commercial percentage, particularly at the first tier. My worst nightmare is to contemplate all of Main Street from Town Pizza down to 128 Tire. The value of that real estate just boosted, and it's driven largely by the density per unit. So to some extent, we can control the expansion, but how do we control it once you have this? How do you prevent it from taking off?
Ms. Garcia?
Can you clarify, how do we prevent which part from taking off?
Those are all single-family buildings from that section I just described, down to, other than the new construction across from Biltmore in Maine. The value of that real estate at 55 or even 65 units is enormous if they're redeveloped into housing with commercial. Yet that's exactly the massing problem people are vocalizing here. So we have competing objectives, the desire for residential at a certain density, but a desire for commercial, moreover, not to sacrifice what you have. So has CPDC given any thought to boosting the percentage or commercial at tier 1 to say 20%, or I'm making numbers up now, but something higher than 10?
Yeah, so the CPDC had a lengthy conversation about what the right percentage of commercial would be to ask for. And they had some recent experience with the mixed-use zoning down on South Main Street, where they put it at 25% of gross floor area, and got a lot of pushback from developers that was too high. And then also looking at the projects that have been constructed and the percentages of commercial that have been provided, and they were trying to find something that would be in the middle as a starting point, so that it's at least feasible enough that potentially redevelopment would happen, right? So that's how they landed on a 10% in the as of right, and then 12.5%, which escalates in the tiers.
But 10 is compliant. Why wouldn't you start at a higher number and waive it down? That gives you the right, but not the obligation.
Can you show the slide? So 10% is only compliant for some projects. It's not compliant for most.
Correct, but it's 10, 12 and a half, and
15, I believe.
right. That still feels rather lean in some cases. Would you want the discretion to start higher and cave if you chose to at the end, rather than beg at a lower number and try to get more?
I mean, there are different approaches, yes. So.
Lastly, it seems to me any developer that's got more than 2 neurons firing at one time is going to tell you he can't get the job done with zoning because he's negotiating. I'd be doing the same thing. I wonder, I do think we need some sense of what the developer's cost basis is. I'm not saying it has to be exact, but we're somewhat flying blind. We're trying to satisfy all developers, but we may find that we're a little too liberal. I'm just wondering, is there any way to know what reasonable is in any of these assessments in terms of what can be done with development? We have to have some understanding. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's more an observation than a question.
I'm not sure that this zoning satisfies any developers, actually.
No, I get it, but it's almost like absent that, you're blind when you do this.
Yeah, so the question of project economics is really complicated, and while the CPDC can ask to understand more, and they will if developers push back enough on what they're being asked to provide, yeah. The information that we have gotten, has been, developers will provide different numbers based on different metrics, right? So in the future, if the CPDC gets to a point where they feel like they're not getting the information they need, then that opens up the process of asking for pro formas, and then maybe even hiring like a third-party financial consultant to come and review and try to help figure it out. But to a certain extent, it's all just numbers. There is no state cap on profitability for 40R developments like there is for 40B. So there isn't any other outside agency that's reviewing and limiting.
I think I'm in favor of Mr. Talbot's approach only because there's a waiver. So you've got to break the glass approach in case there's a real press to go higher. I do think in a separate discussion I would make a motion to increase the commercial percentage by some fixed amount to each of the 3 tiers. But that's for another moment.
Ms. Klisch?
I'm sitting and listening, with thinking about the notion of, okay, well, if somebody wants to go over the cap, then they can get a waiver. That's basically the situation we're in now. The tiered approach gives us, per increase up to the cap that's set and maybe changed, what a developer must do. If they want to go over that with a waiver, then we're back into the situation of, well, there's really no cap on what you can seek for a waiver. And we are outside the bounds of the guidance we've given ourselves based on the community input for what might warrant a waiver. I mention that because I personally, as somebody on CPDC, would rather stay within the realm of what we think is workable than force ourselves into a situation where developers are automatically seeking waivers above our cap and we're establishing that new pattern. That's essentially what we've been doing now.
The gentleman in the aisle, yes.
Philip Dardino, Precinct 3. Move the question.
Okay, I will only accept that on the proposed amendments, not on the entire article. Is there a second? Second, okay. This requires a 2/3 vote. Mr. Sasso, could I have you? We have a point of order? Yes, this would be ending debate on the 2 amendments. If they're really one amendment, there are 2 parts, so we'll take a separate vote on them. But this is ending debate on that. Okay, Mr. Sasso, would you take that section plus the Finance Committee? Let's see, Mr. O'Neill, could I ask you to do the honors? And Mr. Struble, could you take the left center here? And let's see, Mr. Arena, could I ask you to take the left and the select board? Okay, all those in favor of ending debate, please rise. And this is ending debate only on the 2 parts of the proposed amendment.
Twenty-six.
26?
16.
16?
26.
26?
31.
31. And those opposed to ending debate on the proposed amendment?
Nine.
9?
4.
4? 5? Excuse me.
14.
14? The vote being 99 in the affirmative, 32 in the negative. The question has been moved. Debate has ended on both parts of the proposed amendment. We'll begin with taking a vote on the cap. Is that the one that's on the board? Yes, okay. All those in favor of that proposed amendment, please raise your hand. Just as a raising hand. Okay, and those opposed? And the motion does not carry. Mr. Talbot, did you say you wanted to? Is there any opposition to withdrawing the second half? None appearing. We will now go back to the main motion as presented. Point of order?
I'm Mary Ellen O'Neill, Precinct 6. Just a quick question of procedure in terms of who you recognize to speak. Does someone standing in the aisle get recognized before someone sitting and raising his or her hand?
I've tried to do it in the order I see people. If they're up in the back, and I'm assuming that they're raising their hand, but I am trying to do it in the order I see the hands raised.
But if someone's standing in the aisle at the mic, does that person have
Not
priority over someone?
No.
Or which manner should people seek to be
You
recognized?
should be raising your hand.
Raising your hand.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Mr. Ventura?
Mark Ventura, Precinct 2. I think that one area was a unique situation. Excuse me. And we did lose some great businesses. We lost the best roast beef sandwich within 100 miles and a place to get an awesome meal if you weren't in the mood to be Gordon Ramsay that night for your family. But I think that was a unique situation. I think what we failed to realize, and I'll have to disagree with you, Mr. Berman, but I will agree with the young lady across the aisle that all these new developments are pretty much in, I'll call downtown proper. We have some areas that are just a diamond in the rough over by Walker's Brook and the other areas over there. And growing up here, you know, if you take a look just at the warrant cover, or if you remember the old Christmas tree traffic light with the big concrete bollard, if you were to stand there and you look north, you saw the original charm of Reading. You saw the town hall, you saw the white church. Turn around 180 degrees, you might as well be in Malden now. And you know, I don't want to live in Malden. I want to live in Reading, and that's part of the charm growing up here. And like I said, you turn around 180 degrees, we've lost that. I think the smart growth district is almost too big. I do think that one development is just you know, an anomaly, you know, an exception with the businesses. But I'd like to see more focus. Those areas that are a diamond in a rough and could be developed. And, you know, to Mr. Arena's point, I'd hate to see what's happened in that one area where we have all these dense developments carry all the way up, you know, from Town Pizza all the way, you know, down and all that stuff. We could meet our housing needs and put them in an area where it makes more sense without losing the charm of what this town is all about. And it just, like I said, you just have to stand in that one spot, look north, and then turn around 180 degrees. You're like, it's not where I grew up, but that's all. Thank you.
Further discussion? Mr. Cool?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Stephen Cool, Precinct 6. I agree with what the gentleman just said, 100%, 110%, let's say. I moved to Reading in 1978, and for most of the years since, it's been a pretty stable community. But in the last few years, or even, I guess I've got to say about the time that the Atlantic closed and they built the development over where it was, it just seems like the town is becoming people warehouses and big box businesses. And I don't object to having Home Depot and Jordan's and all that, but it just seems the character of Reading has been greatly diminished by what we're seeing now. And as the gentleman just said, you look at Main Street and other areas now, and they're unrecognizable from what they were not that many years ago. The density of population in the downtown area just seems to be growing tremendously, and I think more than really is reasonable. I think the big picture is getting lost in the detail, and like we did with the the $5 parking penalty a couple of meetings ago, we're getting really deeply down into detail. But as I said, I think the big picture is getting lost, and I don't want to see Reading become some of these other towns where they're sort of cold and soulless, and big housing developments like we're looking at now just everywhere around the town, instead of, as that gentleman said, perhaps a little more further from the center of town. I think they diminish the quality of our life rather than enhance it by packing people in with inadequate parking and congestion. I don't think that's the way we should be going. So that's my say.
Ms. Sisson?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Emily Sisson, Precinct 2. I just want to remind everybody that 40R is not a choice. It's a state thing that we have to comply with, and I want to commend CPDC for their thoughtful review of community feedback, of our instructional motions, for trying to maintain the character of these developments as they come. So I will be in full support of all the amendments as proposed, and thank you, CPDC.
Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Mr.
Bill Brown. I'm a newcomer to town. I came here in 1932, and most of you people are living where I used to play. So I think you have to keep in mind, back in the 70s, this town was predicted to be at 35,000 in the 80s. It never reached there. If you look at the telephone building on Sanborn Street, that was built to accommodate 35,000, I'm sorry, landlines, not things. So, and again, most of you people came to Reading after 30. I came here in 1932, and I don't begrudge any of you moving here.
Further discussion? I had Mr. Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Bernie Horn, Precinct 1. So I just have a proposed amendment on 10 point, well, I have two amendments.
We'll take one at a time.
Actually, I have more, but I think that they're related, so I think it's useful to put them together. So the first would be on the parking design, 10.588. And the background for this is that I am also a member of the Parking and Analysis and Recommendations Committee. I was the chair of that. And we heard quite a lot of input from some of the individuals at the developments that you've seen tonight on the screen. And one of the problems that we've heard quite a lot is that the spaces are simply too small for people's ability to park. And the compact spaces are virtually not functional, period. I have two compact cars, and I have spaces that I can park in at 8 feet, as designated here. And I can't even open the doors. I looked up the recommended parking dimensions, and the typical parking, the typical car is about 6 feet in width. 2.5 feet on either side gives you, well, if you have a, anyway, let me just get to my proposal, which is that here I would recommend instead of shall not be less than 9 feet 0 inches. So striking less than 8 feet 6 inches in width. 17 feet in length is probably okay, although some parking recommendations are for more than that. So striking 8 feet 6 inches in width and replacing that with 9 feet.
9 feet.
And one thing that we've heard a lot from people is that they can't use the compact spaces, and we can't possibly know what the cars are that people are going to buy. So, in fact, I think there's only about, nationally, there may be only about 15 or so % of cars are compact. 85% are full size or SUVs. So I would strike everything after the 17 feet in length. So CPDC may allow, and then striking that down to drive aisle requirements just before that. So that would be my first amendment.
Is
and
that
I have
correct?
another.
This is all one proposed amendment?
This is the first amendment, yes.
Okay. And you said the other one was related?
Yes.
Let's listen to it to see if we should discuss them together.
Yes, it's on page, page 24, it's 10.581. And here, the problem here is that 1 1/4 spaces has just not been enough. And I know there'll be quite a lot of contrary opinions to this, but the difficulty in prescribing this number of spaces is simply that what we've seen time and again in the Postmark building and others is that when you have so many spaces allocated, what happens is that the first people to buy up all the spaces. And then the later people that come in to buy don't have any spaces to buy. We've seen that loud and clear at Park. And in fact, at Postmark, you had a situation where I think there were 30 people that needed space. There were about 18, there were more, but just about 20 spaces that were that people needed, they had cars for, but there were no spaces available to be bought. So we absolutely need to change this metric, and it should be non-negotiable, because developers will, in fact, negotiate this away as quickly as they possibly can. So the proposal here would be to delete and two-bedroom under residential units. So studio and one bedroom. Sorry, you can keep the bedroom in there. So probably studio, eliminate the comma and use the word and. Studio and one bedroom.
Okay, they are related. I will allow discussion of both together, but we will vote on them separately.
Thank you. And then in the second line, then it should be greater than one.
Oh, I'm sorry, cut you off.
Greater than one bedroom to be two spaces.
Okay.
So again, it's now, I'm not quite sure what maybe somebody can answer me this question, but the last thing here is that other non-residential, 2,000 square feet or more, leasable space in excess of 2,000 square feet. I must say that confuses me. Then it's one space per 2,000. I'm not sure what that means. Does that mean you're only required to have one space for every 2,000 square feet? Because up above, office and institutional is two spaces per 1,000? It's confusing.
Before we do that, are there seconds to the first proposed amendment? Thank you. And to a second proposed, okay. Ms. Mercier?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So that last section there where it says leasable space in excess of 2,000 square feet, that's for commercial spaces that are more than 2,000 square feet. They need to provide parking spaces at the ratio of one space per 2,000.
So what do they have to provide for in the first 2,000 square feet? That's what
Commercial spaces that are less than 2,000 square feet do not have to provide parking.
So where is that up here? Is that?
Where it's highlighted.
So 0, okay. So I guess I would also further, because again, we've heard from many of the businesses in town that when these developments go up, there's no parking for their customers. We've heard that from many different business owners. So here, I think the standard seems to be that people need at least 4 spaces for every business. So I would put in 4 spaces instead of 0 here. And then on the retail and restaurant, or retail or restaurant, I would suggest here, 4 spaces as well. On the top line.
Are you making that a third proposed amendment?
Well, this is the second. So the first one was on the size. The second is here.
So this is all one.
This is kind of the second amendment to address this.
Okay.
And again, the only thing I would say is that the town's interest in 40R is strictly to maximize tax revenue, right? I think when the development department was illustrating some of the benefits to this, it was reported that the already completed properties, and I think that's before that just included, I think, the old Mark building as well as Postmark. I think there was about $10 million of additional revenue is projected. We have a $100 million budget. That's 10% increase in our tax revenues just on a few buildings already. I will stand corrected, but that's what I recall. The town is generating a lot of extra tax revenues. We're inviting these people to our town to buy these properties. When you buy a primary residence, it's probably the most expensive investment you can make with your money in your life. It's incumbent upon us, if we're using these developers as our agents to maximize tax revenues, it's important that we do so responsibly. And I think what we're going to see is in all the waivers that are being granted, the waivers that were being granted in the other parts of this amendment effectively have no teeth, but restricting the number of parking spaces is hard and fast. It can't be negotiated. It shouldn't be negotiated away, and it's more responsible so that people can have a higher quality of life. Now, I will say that, if you read the Reading Chronicle last week, there were reports of the litigation that's gone on between one building and the tenants because of parking. We just don't need to have that sort of low quality of life where people have to sue the developers just to get their space. And then CPDC themselves had arguments it was reported, at least in the Chronicle, that they had to retroactively go back and waive the requirements because they weren't enough or that they weren't built as specified. So I guess I'll just stop there and say that this is the town body. We're responsible for this, and I think it's important that we act responsibly and ethically when we're making these requirements. Thanks.
Okay, again, I'll repeat, we are discussing both proposed amendments.
Point of order.
Point of order, yes, Mr. Struble.
Jeff Struble, Precinct 7, and also on the Bylaw Committee. Is it possible, is it legal, I guess, for us to modify something in this motion that was not part of the motion? It was this last portion where he's modifying from 0 to 4. That wasn't ever going to be changed in this motion. Are we overstepping ourselves here?
Well, we had a long discussion about this earlier, and the way the article has been presented as a holistic change for the entire thing, so I have allowed more leeway than normal.
Okay.
I understand your question because I actually considered that earlier. People who have not spoken yet. I'm sorry, Ms. Mercier.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just did want to clarify a few things, which may not change the calculus for everybody in the room, but I just want to make sure you have the information as at least staff understand it. So with regard to compact spaces being too tight, there was one project that was constructed not as approved in our downtown, and the compact spaces that were too tight in that project were constructed at less than 8 feet in width. In some cases, less than 7 foot 10 inches. So. That was an outstanding, sort of an outlier situation. The compact size that we are promoting in this bylaw is pretty standard across, traffic consultant standards, right? And across communities in this area. The other thing I want to clarify is the statement that was made that the early owners in projects buy up all the spaces. So. I have relationships with the property management companies and with the developers of our multifamily projects downtown, and over the course of many years, I've collected a lot of data about all these things, as you've seen on these like spreadsheets that want to make your eyes bleed. Typically the way that it works in all of these projects, the rentals and the ownership projects, is that there's a parking space in the garage allocated or reserved for each residential unit, and then. Beyond that, if it's an ownership project, owners, if there's surplus parking, owners can look to buy a second space or rent a second space. But it is not the case that the early owners or early renters get to take as many as they want, and then the people who move in later on in the project are stuck with nothing. And then I did want to also just clarify a comment that Ms. Sisson made earlier about 40R not being a choice. So 40B is not a choice. 40R is a choice, and it's a choice that was made by this body in 2009 when the Downtown Smart Growth District was adopted, and then also again in 2017 when it was expanded. What we choose with 40R now is how to amend it and tweak it and modify it and whether to still have it. So, thank you.
Mr. Ventura?
Mark Ventura, Precinct 2. Regarding his first amendment that he would like to make regarding the size developments on these smaller lots, I've never seen any zoning regulations that allows 25% compact spaces in their lot. I've just never seen it. I mean, go to any retail development, that's where my background was when I did that sort of thing, and just count up how many compact spaces they have compared to the rest of the lot. There's a reason for that, because people drive, even a compact car in a compact space isn't the most comfortable thing in the world, but the 25% is what gets me, and I just feel that was a mechanism to allow developers to jam more in, 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag, so to speak, to meet these parking requirements. I think the 25% is too high. So, though I don't agree with the amendment as it's written for the 8'6", because that is a compact space width. It's the percentage that gets me. And it'll, yeah, I guess.
Mr. DiRezzo?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Tony DiRezzo, Precinct 2, Associate Member of CPDC. A couple of points I would like to make about Mr. Oh, shoot, I forget his name. The motion. First off, the change in size is specific to parking spaces within a garage or podium. It is not for outside parking spaces. So these are only the ones that would be inside. Also, changing from 0 to 4, I actually brought that up because it has been one of my sore spots over the years, but this matches our current zoning for Business B, where any off-street parking within 300 feet of a public off-street parking. That is what you're referring to in the retail or restaurant at 0 spaces. This is the same that they have in Business B today. So that's why it was left at 0 and not changed. Thank you.
Further discussion? Ms. Lestrade?
I just want some clarification. Oh, Cheryl Lestrade, Precinct 5, some clarification. So as far as parking, residential parking for the units, personally, for where I live at Ace Flats. The residential parking for some of the units are paid parking, although they're residential parking, quote unquote, they are paid parking. Now we're talking about building a bigger unit with residential parking. When people have visitors, where are those people parking? They're then taking up business parking in other areas and then walking down to the units. So are we taking that into consideration when we're approving parking units and parking per units, the residential parking as well as visitor parking?
Ms. Mercier?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Mrs. Strada. So guest parking and visitor parking is not currently required in the 40R zoning, but we do have something proposed in the proposed zoning that we're discussing tonight in the waiver section that projects seeking increased density would need to provide either additional guest parking spaces or parking spaces for their commercial tenants.
Further discussion on the proposed amendments? Mr. Sasso, and I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Sasso, Precinct 2. Ms. Mercer, can you put the slide back up that you guys presented on the parking, i.e. what would have been the existing developments and how they satisfy the new parking regulations?
I think it's way up.
That's it. Thank you. So, I appreciate this amendment. I looked at the slide and all of the changes that were highlighted seem to indicate, some changes that would have been made as a result of these bylaw changes that you're making here. With the exception of this in some respects. I mean, if you look at the additional spaces required, basically there's really not much that would have been adjusted as a result of the bylaw changes that you're making. So I was actually thinking along the same lines that this was an area where we needed to make some adjustments, and having listened to some of the park committee meetings as well, I heard the same thing, that the parking situation has not been solved by the 40R district. In fact, I think I recall a discussion about some off-site parking the town was considering implementing downtown to address the issue of visitor parking and overnight parking. Is that still on the table?
Ms. Mercier?
I don't know if Chris, I think you may have been talking about that at one point during one of the meetings.
Yeah, so there are people here who can probably speak to this better than I can, but the select board did work out like a pilot sort of overnight parking program in one of the lots off of Lincoln Street by the depot.
Okay. Yeah, so so everybody understands what they're saying is that they've already recognized there's already a problem downtown. Obviously, a lot of the park improvements are going to address some of the business-related issues per se, but one of the recommendations is to use an existing town lot, I believe, for some pilot parking offsite. So we're already facing the issue where these developments are not satisfying the basic needs of its residents. So I happen to support the increase of the parking requirements to just in relation to the one studio and one bedroom and then up to 2 bedrooms. I would like to think you consider removing the 4 for the if you can go back to the amendment, right? So the retail or restaurant or the other non-residential, Mr. DeRezzo is correct in the current underlying zoning. There is no requirement for spaces on those uses if they are within 300 feet of a parking lot, I believe. And I think the 1 space per 2,000 square feet is also in the underlying zoning for commercial office. Is that, Ms. Mercer, is that correct? I think that's the case.
Ms. Mercier?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I actually think that it's 1 per 300.
Oh, it's 1 for 300 in the existing.
For commercial and and most other districts, yeah.
Okay, all right.
That's
okay.
Could be wrong about that, but
okay. I again just suggest that we think about removing those. I certainly am supporting of the adjustment in the residential unit adjustments. Thank you very much.
Ms. Borowski?
Thank you. Jean Borowski, Precinct 6. I'm a little bit concerned about this amendment, particularly the 2 spaces per unit for 2 bedrooms or more, because as I understand it, I'm actually going to ask a clarifying question. The more space we are required to provide for parking, that's less space we have for affordable housing, green space, commercial, correct? So while I appreciate the need, and it's a really important need to make sure we have adequate parking for our residents, if we have too much parking, that's space that could be used for green space, affordable housing, or commercial. So it's really important that we get the amount right. And when I see 2-bedroom apartments each, or condos each getting 2 parking spaces, I think about the single parent with 1 kid. I think about the married couple with 1 car that both commute via the commuter rail and keep 1 car between them. 2 cars for every 2 bedrooms just feels to me excessive, and I think we might be swinging too far in the other direction. So that's why I'm inclined to not support this amendment. And I would like to echo some of the comments. I think the work done by CPDC on this has been exemplary and thorough and very nuanced, and I really appreciate the creativity.
Further discussion? Mr. Haley?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chris Haley, Precinct 7, Select Board member. I really commend Heather on this presentation. It was pretty amazing, and the same thing with all the tiers is pretty incredible. I think that the parking issue is just getting compounded on each and every development that comes up. So seeing it getting changed, as Bernie's proposing there, makes sense to me, because as much as we want to think about the single people that are just coming in, taking the train all day, that's what it was done originally, back in like 2017. And look where we ended up now. There's people having to park over at the train depot because they didn't plan accordingly because they were only given the 1 spot. But at the same time, they don't have a spot to purchase themselves to rectify the issue. So just changing the spaces, how it is presented, that Bernie mentioned, makes sense to me. Changing the 0 to a 4, I think changing that to 2, if anything. I mean, 4 realistically seems like the right number because having 0 is just ludicrous to me. But changing it down to 2, it just seems to be accommodating reasonably with such a massive change like that. And then on the changing the size of the compact spots and all that, yes, by changing that to a higher higher ratio to changing it to the 9 feet instead, that is going to drive the amount of spots down that they can do, which will drive the amount of units that are going to come down as well, because they can't fit all the parking in. And then it's going to go back into Dave's ratio over there, where now you're coming closer to going 65 instead of 73 on the other things. But the biggest thing is, like Ed mentioned, Bernie proposing the additional spots like that. They're sorely needed. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting here listening to me every single year when there's no parking spots for any of the new developments. So, thank you.
Further discussion? People who have not spoken yet? Yes, and Mr. Zeke?
David Zeke, Precinct 5. So I live at the postmark now. That's how I got to 5. I've really found it bizarre from the very first day that there were any compact parking spots in the building. Because when you buy a condominium and you pay $500,000 or $750,000 for that condominium, it comes attached with some parking spot in the garage. The allocation of those parking spots is entirely something that the developer dreamed up, and it was not really communicated to any of the people who purchased the condos when they did. But you found out because it was deeded as part of the deed that we had. It makes no sense to me that if any condominium should have, it seems to me, should have one of these, one of the larger, and in fact the increase, the 9-foot wide parking spot, because you don't know what kind of a car is going to be associated with any person who buys the condo. And if you sell the condo again afterward, that's going to it makes a difference, of what your marketability is. So I fully support this amendment. I think I'm surprised that we kind of got to this spot. It seems I can sort of understand a situation where maybe a management company is managing a pool of parking stalls, but that's really not what's going on. So I really support this amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion? Ms. Brucolacchio?
Hi, Mr. Moderator, Sarah Brucolacchio, Precinct 4. I'm also a park member. I also have an amendment for this, but it's very similar to what Bernie's written here. So I just want to say that, first I want to say one thing. The Park Committee, we've made our long list of recommendations to the Select Board, and we want to put these kiosks in these parking lots that are the reason why there's no need for commercial spaces in the 40R. These parking lots are already very full. So we want to put these kiosks in to get them to move. And hopefully, fingers crossed, this is going to put the fingers in the dike and we'll manage our parking. But then we have at least 2 more 40R projects coming down the pike that are going to be having more cars overflowing onto our streets. So I think this would be very short-sighted not to address the parking and the zoning thing. And I just want to read to you a letter that the Chief of Police sent to the CPDC. This was in regards to the 128 project. And I'm reading just a paragraph that they wrote, sort of summarizing their concerns. New resident parking has been the problem the town has encountered with the recent downtown developments. Polling the residents of the other new developments, we know that most have 2, sometimes 3 cars per unit, with just 1 space assigned and no place to park their additional cars. There is no overnight parking in most municipal lots overnight and during snow emergencies. Furthermore, there is no off-street area planned for garbage pickup, delivery trucks, moving vans, etc., which again will have an impact on traffic. These vehicles will no doubt attempt to park in a travel lane, which is what has been reported to the police at other new developments. I see this all the time. Amazon Prime vans double parked, FedEx trucks double parked. Basically, every unit, the people who own a unit or rent a unit, every single one of their cars has to find a place for the night that's off our streets. So in order to do that, we need to increase the parking that's in these buildings. We do not have overnight parking on our streets. Our 2 municipal lots are not for overnight parking. The police have been very generous in that they only enforce it during snowstorms. And Julie said they're trying out a pilot project of using some of the unused spots down by the depot for people to park there on snowban nights. But I think that anybody who goes downtown, for all of the people that are living in these units, I don't even know if any of them are here, but we heard so many of them speak at the park meetings. And, you know, we want people to be happy to be in Reading. We want them to not be all distressed about parking their car. So that's just what I want to say. Thank you.
Further discussion? Mr. Doxer?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mark Doxer, Precinct 1 and Chair of the Select Board. I want to kind of echo what Ms. Borowski was saying before. I think we need to look at this very holistically in terms of what we're trying to do, and to be very careful where we've talked a lot about commercial development. And if we do a lot of increases in parking, we're going to squeeze it right back out and just kind of go right against what we're saying we really wanted to do. So I think we need to be really careful about that. As it relates to the commercial spaces, what the recommendations from Park, the kiosks, all the systems we're putting into place are designed to allow people to be able to shop and for things to turn over. If we create a 4-spot requirement, I'm just not sure where they're going to come from. It's not there. And I think that it's a sharing activity. It's not that people are in all the stores at all the same time. I think the notion we have is that things are going to turn over. So I'm actually not going to support any of these latest amendments. Thank you.
Further discussion of people who have not yet spoken? Yes.
Christopher Futo, Precinct 4. I move the question.
Okay, this moves the question on the 2 proposed amendments before us. But we'd still go back to the main motion after this. Point of order, Mr. DeRezzo?
If Mr. Horn will accept a friendly amendment, at the bottom where you see 2,000 square feet, more than 2,000 square feet of leasable space, currently the amendment states you only need 1 space per 2,000. I question whether Mr. Horn is looking for 4 spaces plus 1 per 2,000. Otherwise, less than 2,000 needs 4, but 3,000 only needs 1 or 2.
Okay, Mr. Horn, I'm only going to allow this discussion on this particular thing, then we have to go to the vote to end debate.
Yeah, so with respect to the friendly amendment, I think that would not be correct because, as I asked earlier, the current requirement is for any commercial space 2,000 feet or less. There is 0 requirement. So I was proposing that space, that if you have space of 2,000, you still should have 4 spaces. And again, that's based on the idea that we had many businesses coming saying that they had 2 owners.
Oh, okay, we will not accept that then. We need to go to vote on ending debate, but I just wanted to first to see if it was something that you had missed maybe. Okay, this is a vote to end debate. It requires a 2/3 vote. Do I still have all my counters? I believe I do. All those in favor of ending debate on these 2 proposed amendments on the parking, please rise.
Eighteen.
29.
29. 44. 35. And those opposed, please rise. Opposed to ending debate.
3.
3, I'm sorry.
4.
4. 1.
3, I said.
3, okay. 0, oh, okay. The vote being 126 in the affirmative, 8 in the negative, the question has been moved, debate has ended.
Point of order, Mr. Moderator.
Point of order, Mr. Berman?
Barry Berman, Precinct 6. So if one were inclined to support Mr. Horn's amendment for the residential, but not the commercial, were we voting on one motion?
We are
or
voting on
breaking
2
it?
motions, 2
So
separate motions.
There's a motion here. It doesn't deal with size. It deals with changing the composition of residential spaces, and then there's one for the non-residential spaces. Is that one motion? Because somebody might be inclined to support
2 motions,
residential
correct.
and not commercial. and vice versa.
Let's get a clarification. Mr. Horn? Right, and then the other is this, everything else is on the second, right.
So what's on the screen right now is one amendment.
One proposed amendment.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, we are going to take them, let's see, we'll take the second one first? Change the dimension. Okay, we will start with the one that's on the screen, unless you can find that other one fast, the first one?
10.5.88.
Yeah, we'll vote them on the order that you did it, so just to keep it straight. Okay, so this is the first proposed amendment. Okay, everybody clear on that? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Oh, another point of order?
I think our zoning bylaw is a 9 by 18 space, standard parking space, if someone could correct me on that. So essentially, to call a compact space 9 by 18 is sort of,
okay,
you're eliminating
there's no debate on ending.
No, it's not a debate. It's just the language of, it doesn't make any sense. You're just eliminating compact spaces altogether because it meets the standard parking
debate.
size.
We're voting on ending debate. We cannot have any more debate. The motion that is in front of you now is the first proposed amendment. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, motion does not carry. Now, if we could have the second one. Okay. All those in favor of the motion in front of you, please raise your hand. And those opposed, motion does not carry. We now go back to, okay, Ms. Binder, we're now back to the main motion. You have a point of order? Oh, I'm sorry, that's a point of order?
I feel like we're rushing these votes. I don't think anyone got their chance to have their hands up, and I can imagine that that didn't pass along with even Dave's proposal earlier. It was so fast, I don't even think I had my hand all the way up. Can we do a standing vote for that vote? Can we re-vote?
Yeah, do 7 people question the vote? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we will have a standing vote then. Which amendment are you talking for, the second one or the first? Both? Okay. All right, we will go to a standing vote for each one. Point of order? The one that is in front of you right now, crossing out 8 feet 6 inches and replacing it with 9 feet. And then it goes on to remove everything from CPDC may allow all the way down to feet in length, everything that's in blue and crossed out. That is the first motion, and we will take a standing count. All those in favor of that proposed amendment, please rise.
No. 11.
11, excuse me, 11.
7.
7.
18.
18.
21.
21. And those opposed to that proposed amendment.
Fourteen.
14.
10.
10.
21.
21.
27.
27. The vote being 57 in the affirmative, 72 in the negative, the motion does not carry. Now we will go to a standing count for the second motion. Can we have that up on the screen? Okay, this puts a comma after studio and puts the word and then one, and that crosses out and two, and then it follows with bedroom. Oh, actually above that, excuse me, retail or restaurant. It changes it from 0 to 4? 0 to 4, yes. And the same thing with, then residential units greater than, it did say 2, and now it would say 1. And then below that, on other residential, less than 2,000 square feet, 0 is replaced with 4. So it's the one that's up on the screen. All those in favor of that motion, please rise. Thirteen?
6.
6?
13.
13, and what was the other one?
7.
7, okay. And those opposed?
Thirteen.
13?
15.
15? 32? 31. The vote being 39 in the affirmative, 91 in the negative, the motion does not carry. We now go back to the main motion. Ms. Binder, I actually called on you before. Ms. Binder, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Angela Binder, Precinct 5. I want to thank the CPDC, Julie, and all the town staff because you've done a tremendous amount of work, and I think it makes tremendous progress to getting to where we want to go. I've spoken to some of you. I have some questions. They're in several pieces with the definitions and with the tiered waiver. I'm going to start with the easiest one. The easiest, I'm not going to make a motion, I'm just going to make a recommendation. I hope that if for a fund that is set up for money to go to trails or outdoor space or whatever it is in one of the waivers, I would hope that it'd be considered that that money stays in the downtown area, because while I think it's nice to put that money to the the park or the town forest, if we're increasing the density in the town, if there's any money that's given by the developers to alleviate density, I hope it stays in the downtown towards whatever it's put to use. So, if you turn to page 19 with the definitions, this is what I want to talk about, and I have submitted proposed changes on the definition of open space. The town has a definition of open space in Article 2 of the zoning under definitions. And I think that what we should do is copy that definition and put it into this part under the 40R, as you've done with another definition. I forget what it was, lot coverage or something. You did the same thing. And I want to unstack the definitions for several reasons. I think that we need to have consistent language in all areas of zoning. So I don't think it's appropriate to have one definition of open space for some of the zoning and a very different definition of open space in this area. And I think that what you have is somewhat opposed to what it is. To give an example, we might have different zoning in different parts of town. You might have a requirement for a quarter of an acre for a house lot in one part of town or a full acre in another part of town. So the zoning can vary, but we all agree on what an acre is. So I think the language and definition should be consistent. So what I have done here, I've changed the definition of open space. I have unbundled the civic space, green space, and amenity space, and all that is in blue, it just comes from our definition. So this isn't my definition. This is the definition that the town has written and that we have all agreed upon what is open space. And it says public or privately owned land areas unobstructed to the sky that are not occupied by buildings, structures, parking areas, streets or alleys. Open spaces shall be permitted to be devoted to landscaping, preservation of natural features, patios and recreational areas or facilities. And I would like that to be the definition of open space. I have made a few changes. That's a little difficult to see. Under civic space, what I have, the only thing that I've changed is, crossed out as defined below, because I would also hope that these are in alphabetical order, so it's not as defined below. As far as green space, I have added, it says portions of a private lot or building, and I have added that are partly or completely covered in green, in grass, trees, shrubs, or other vegetation. And then as far as private amenity space, I've just changed it to an actual definition, not just a listing. So it says areas or features of a private building for use by residents of commercial tenant, green space, balcony. So
Are you making these as proposed amendments?
I am making these
Okay,
as,
is this
is a
single one? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. I just wanna make sure.
So I would like to make these, yes, okay. So these are the proposed amendments that I want to make to the definitions. The other portion that I want to make, so I also want to say, I understand what you're talking about. You asked people what they felt was open space, and I completely agree that the things that were listed, that you list as civic space, green space, private amenity space, these are very important elements, and I completely agree that they help. You know, if you have balconies, it's good for the tenants. It also breaks up the facade of a building. A green roof, it's a very good thing for the environment. You know, they have merit. I'm not saying that people don't want them. I think they're great. They would be great additions. I'm just saying that I wouldn't define them as open space. They are defined as civic space, green space, or private amenity space. So I also have changes to the tiered area, the tiered proposals, because I want to clarify, and I think that it would be helpful to maybe to keep track of if a developer is asking for waivers, what are they actually doing? Like, you want to know that a developer, or I would want to know, like you track things, you know, when the developers choose what elements to use from a waiver, are they actually putting in open space, or is everybody just choosing balconies? And if everybody's choosing balconies, well, okay, what do we do to make them choose something else? So I do have the proposed amendments.
Well, we will come back to that. We want to have one before us for now, unless they're tied together. But
they are kind of tied together. If this isn't accepted, then I don't need to go on to the second thing. So I mean, but if and Heather, you've looked at this, and you know the staff has looked at this. You said that you had some tweaks to it, some friendly amendments to my amendment, and I would be completely open to hearing, you know, what you wanted to change to this.
I think we will stick with the first proposed amendment. We'll discuss that, and then we'll come back to you after that. So you have one proposed amendment before the body.
Well, this is
right
the
now.
proposed amendment, and Ms. Klisch spoke to me earlier that she said, would you be okay if I tweak this a little? So I'm just allowing her to tweak it a little before we discuss it.
Yes, Ms. Klisch?
Okay, thank you. And I'm realizing, thank you, Ms. Binda, for the full explanation, because I may actually have a question in return. Okay, so one amendment one friendly amendment to your amendment that is fairly straightforward is under green space, where I would suggest because my suggestion is where we say, it would say portions of a private lot or building that are natural surfaces, comma, or completely covered in grass, et cetera, because the examples that we give include trails and pathways, which ideally are not covered with shrubbery, so we can pass them. So I would just add that natural surfaces.
That are natural surfaces or partly or completely covered in grass.
Yes.
That's fine.
Okay, that's okay with your...
The other one, but I may be now misunderstanding the overall thing, is that I was going to suggest in the open space definition, in this one for 40R purposes, deleting alleys, because under civic space, we include alleyways, and the reason we include alleyways is because people really like the pedestrian alleyways, the little pathways between the buildings that we have from Main Street, and I didn't want that to be inconsistent. I was thinking in the frame of open space as still including the suite of civic public space, green space, which may be civic space, and private amenity space, which may be green space, because later on in the waivers, all of our language is about the percentage of lot area that is open space, and so I don't want that to become fractured. But and I would still, if we're going to pursue this, I would still delete alleys for the purpose of 40R, so that we're not inconsistent with what we're describing in terms of civic space. I am a little bit confused about how this will then relate to how we're treating open space broadly as the suite of these things later on.
Did you see, because I know you have this part of it, did you see those changes?
I think I saw partial changes because, anyhow, I think I only saw partial changes.
So we can take alleys out.
And can I ask, can we make it clear what she's actually proposing so we know what's before the body? I'm confused myself. Is everything? Oh, okay, good. Okay, is that your proposed amendment now?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, and then you should say parking areas or streets.
Okay. Is that? All right. Is there a second to the motion? Second, okay. Ms. Binder, you all set or you continue?
So I can continue. So I don't know if my next one was to 259, and I don't know if that's necessary.
Well,
I'm going to skip
We'll take
over
a second amendment later, but I just
Yep.
meant, do you have any more
so-
discussion on this particular proposal?
that. So I'm finished with this, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Further discussion on this proposed amendment? Yes, Mr. Arena.
John Arena, Precinct 1. Ms. Klisch, what is the materiality of these edits? What is facilitated by the added blue language that the predecessor black language did not provide?
Ms. Klisch?
Well, that's a good question. The materiality is probably repeating the open space definition for the most part that is already in our bylaw in Section 2, not in the 40R section of the bylaw. The materiality is also, I don't have the answer to this other one, but what's on my mind is a number of reworkings would probably then need to be done to the waivers section, because we frame open space as including, in this definition, civic space, green space, private amenity space. We later on treat open space in its entirety, including those three aspects of it, in our treatment of how the waivers will be approached.
Did I understand you to say this is duplicated by another section of the bylaws, this language?
No, I'm saying this complicates another section of the bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
Can I,
Ms. Binder?
may I address
Yes.
that?
Yes.
So I do have proposed language change, so I don't feel that it complicates it. I feel that what it does is 5 years from now, if you're not here or there are different people, we might be looking at this saying, you know, what does this mean? And there have been many times where we have looked at language in our bylaws and said, I don't understand I don't understand what that means. I don't. So if you go to the zoning bylaw, up here, it says public or privately owned land areas unobstructed to the sky, not occupied by buildings. By definition, open space is at ground level. If you go to the tiers, it says open space comprising at least 50% of which is at grade level. Well, by definition, open space is 100% at it. So how can you have a requirement that says 50% of something that is 100% is at grade level? It's inconsistent. Not having this definition and not changing that, I believe, muddies it up, because you're being very inconsistent with what you're defining as open space. And like I said, I don't feel like there should be completely separate definitions or opposing definitions of open space in different areas of the bylaw.
I can try to speak a little bit to this, and town council may want to say something as well about the relationship of the overlay district zoning definitions to other portions of our bylaw. Our overlay district zonings do have a variety of definitions that are expanded on, tweaked, that are particular to those overlay districts, which downtown smart growth is an overlay district. So that may have been confusing, but I'll just leave that there. In terms of open space, a difference, the language that Ms. Binda is proposing in the open space is language that is from the overall definitions of our overall bylaw. Our intention here in the 40R district, remember, we know that people wanted a variety of types of open space. This is all getting back to what are we hearing that people want, and people want a mix of things, and applying the flexibility that we know is helpful and necessary when we're looking at different properties and different things. So the first definition, if you read it, really does speak to what open space is: the absence of something. It is the absence of a structure. It is an absence of a parking area. What we are aiming for in the definitions that we were proposing is a clearer explanation, or a clearer expression of what the community would like to see. So, open space by the first definition could be, and we have some examples of this. If a building, the lot lines in Reading are not all square. Buildings generally are square. For example, open space could be counted if a building is on a lot line that is not square. That little piece of land can be counted in the open space calculation, even if it's not having any purpose or being programmed for purpose. It's not landscaped. It might look like it's part of a driveway, but it's not really. That could count in the calculation. What we are aiming for is a clearer expression of community values to CPDC and to the developers of what we would like to see there. And that is when we get to the waivers, we're talking about what we would like to see here. So it's kind of an explanation of what we were aiming for in the definitions that we proposed. How they fit together, we can discuss.
Can we go to my proposed changes to 10.5, 12.1 so I can show you how I handle this?
Why don't you explain it, and we'll still take it as a separate amendment, but explain what you
But can you, can you scroll up to it?
Can we scroll up to it? You think there are? Okay. Well, make your proposed amendment, and we may tie them together.
What I have changed is open space provided at grade, and what I've changed it to is desired space, open space, as well as civic space, green space, or private amenity space. So all I'm trying to do is actually delineate what is meant by that, because just by saying open space, it is less clear, not more clear, because it could be a number of things, and it's also ambiguous to say, or contradictory to say 50% of open space must be at grade level.
Is that it?
So, yes, so for tier one, that's what I want to say, as opposed to saying open space 50%. I'm trying to really define what is meant by that. So it's desired space, open space, as well as civic space or green space or private amenity space.
So you want to add green space into that
Yes,
as well?
that's actually in what I sent you. So it says open space, which would be at grade level, as well as civic space, green space, or private amenity space. And so for tier two, instead of open space, I have desired space shall be provided on space, open space shall be provided on, comprising 10% at least. Okay. So I sent the amendments.
I wasn't clear when I read
Okay,
the
right there, yes, that's what I sent, okay. So tier two, instead of saying open space, it says desired space shall be provided on site. Desired space shall be provided on-site comprising 10% of the lot, at least 50% of which is open space, and the rest may be civic space, green space, and/or private amenity space. So you're actually, I believe it's clearer because you're delineating that the desired space is open space for a portion of it, and then these other things for a portion of it. And so for tier three, again, the same thing. Instead of just writing open space, 50% at ground level, it is changed to desired space, colon, shall be provided on site in a total amount equivalent to 50% of the lot area, at least 50% of which is publicly accessible open space, and the other 50% may be civic space, green space, or private amenity space.
When we're done, I think I have a comment on this.
Point of order? Who was that? I heard.
In the interest of time, it does seem like we're getting up to 10 minutes, and I'm having a hard time following this up, down.
Yes, I am too.
Language. It's getting late. I'm concerned people are going to either just vote it through or not put it the attention. So can we either move it along or somehow limit the amount of changes?
Are you making this as a second proposed amendment? It is getting a little confusing. Point is taken.
So I submitted these earlier. They go together because
Then I will allow a discussion on both together, but you're making two separate motions, is that correct? Just one second. Are you making two separate motions? Okay.
No, it's one.
Ms. Freed?
Advice of,
No, precinct 7.
yeah.
Did we have a comment over here? I'm sorry. Or are we all set? Oh, what did you say? What is your?
Well, I guess they don't exist separately, so it's one motion.
So every change that you've proposed right now is all one motion?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And so the point is, so for tier three, yes, open space, desired space shall be provided on site, and the other 50% may be civic space, green space, and I would add and/or private amenity space.
Okay, is that extent of the
Yeah,
changes?
and
Okay.
I think the language is clearer this way. I think it defines what what they're getting at. I'm not changing it, I'm just delineating it and making the language consistent with other And I'm also not saying we don't want these things. I'm just saying let's call them what they are.
Okay, just to be clear, this is all one proposed amendment right now. That's what's before the body. Further discussion? Yes, Mr. Arena.
John Arena, Precinct 1. Given that these amendments were provided to CPDC prior to tonight, does CPDC have an opinion?
Point of order. The CPDC was not given these amendments.
Who was given the amendments?
I was given the amendments a couple hours before.
Do you
it
have an
started.
opinion as to the for or against the blue comments?
I do have an opinion, and I'm reading these as they're coming in to make sure I understand. I might want to make sure that we're putting them in there correctly. We've thought a lot about this. My overall concern, with respect to, I kind of understand what Ms. Binda is trying to do. My overall concern is that by mixing the definition of open space, which is the absence of something, with the definitions of what we want and putting those all into the percentages is, I will say, it's confusing me a little bit. I have a very specific example of why I personally wanted to have something that was a little bit more expressive than just the absence of something. An example from one of the projects that we reviewed was a kind of it was an interesting angular outdoor kind of entrance area that the developer calculated as open space. And it was kind of, speaking of, just according to the site, it just, the way the angles of the building went and everything, it was made sense for a way of an entryway. Well, that got calculated at one iteration as open space. And we looked at that and I saw, okay, it is the absence, it's on the property, it's the absence of a structure. So by our only definition that we had in the bylaw, technically it's open space. However, it wouldn't be usable if people were actually hanging out there. They might be called on for loitering. It isn't doing what we wanted to, which is why we went to the more complete ones. I'm looking at this and I have to admit, sometimes I have a hard time thinking on the fly in front of 100 and some people. But
it's not just you, by the way.
But I'm a little bit concerned about specifying that 50% must be open space, which is at grade. I understand kind of the implicit notion that open space, by our definition, would be at grade because it doesn't have a structure on it. But saying then it must be at grade, publicly accessible, and then we have another percentage of the other things. I work a lot in the open space realm as part of my day job, and this gets very confusing to me in terms of what I've thought a lot about, in terms of what I want to express as part of what we've heard we want the community to express.
Well, thank you for your opinion. I would tell the members of this body that it's really hard to do zoning as a group, and that's why we have zoning bodies to bring, other than trivial or Scrivener's errors or things of that sort. This is nearly impossible to do as a body of 192 persons. I would suggest that maybe this subject matter be taken up by CPDC and brought forth in a subsequent meeting for reconsideration, but I don't know how to do this on the fly. We're doing surgery on a complex document, and it's really easy for unintended consequences to creep in of the sort you just described.
Yeah, I might say that something that CPDC might want to do, because I really understand the idea of having consistency across these definitions, is at another time take a look at the open space definition in our bylaw, but that's not under consideration tonight.
Mr. Brown?
Bill Brown, Precinct 8. I move to indefinitely postpone Article 15.
Okay, we have a motion to indefinitely postpone the entire article.
The entire article,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, is there a second? Second, okay. We have, we'll take up the amendments, but then we will, they came first, but then we will move for the indefinite postponement right after that. Do we have further discussion on the proposed amendment? Actually, you're right. We do have to, no, that's not. Indefinite postponement is just the same as defeating the motion, so it's not, yeah. Mr. Barnes?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jonathan Barnes, Precinct 5. Part of the point is well taken. This is complicated stuff, I agree. But regrettably, or perhaps not regrettably, it's something the town meeting is charged to do. We have to entertain and approve zoning amendments, so I don't see the value in putting it off or deferring it or expanding it for another year. A lot of work has been put into this, and we should do the work that's required to finish it. With respect to this particular issue, maybe it's me. There's a lot of things I see as complicated. I don't see this as all that complicated. I believe the point is that there is, in the town bylaw, a definition for open space, and it's pretty specific, among other things. It's open to the sky, and it's not part of the building, a building. So I think all this amendment, or this combination of amendments is doing, is that it's keeping that definition. But in addition to that, what I believe CPDC has tried to do is they have tried to say, and they're asking us to say, and I agree, we think that for purposes of the 40R projects, in terms of offering waivers, we think it's valuable for developers to consider providing, and we will consider giving them a waiver for, number one, if they provide open space, number two, alternatively, if they provide civic space, and number three, if they provide green space or perhaps private amenity space. It's really not that complicated. Open space means open space, and we would be saying here that for purposes of a waiver, if a developer comes in with a proposal of a certain amount of open space and a certain amount of civic space and or green space, et cetera, they can get the waiver. It's really not that complicated. Thank you.
Ms. McCarthy, did you have a question?
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. Jackie McCarthy, Precinct 7. I think I know the answer to this, but just a question about the origin of the definitions for civic space, green space, and private amenity space. Did that come from the 40R law? Or it sounds like it was also an attempt to articulate in more specifics the kinds of quote unquote, downtown appropriate or smart growth appropriate open space, but I'd like to hear more about how the CPDC decided on those definitions. Thanks.
Ms. Klisch.
Sure, I can attempt to answer that. This was a point of discussion over a number of meetings. One was kind of out of an acknowledgement that open space is a general term and just colloquial language, and like my professional world, there is no consistent definition of open space. So we wanted to, when people were saying they wanted open space, we went a little bit into, okay, what kind of things are people wanting? And we looked at the survey results, we looked at the focus group results, we see that people want green. All right, so a certain type of open space is the green space. It's the landscaping, it's the pathways that might be available in certain areas. People also talked about benches, sometimes just openings, broadened sidewalks, places where people would be street side that help to support the community. And I think I actually looked up, I came up with an example from another town. I said, oh, civic space, that kind of does it. It kind of builds a civic spirit in a neighborhood that we're trying to aim for. So we named it that, and then we included examples of the types of things people wanted to see. And then there is also the private amenity space, right? So there are some places, the Postmark building is actually a really good example for those of you who are familiar with it. Not the Haven Street side, but is it the Linden Street side, where there's a pretty little courtyard there that is entirely private. It's stepped up. It's not ground level. It's not on the ground. It's private. It's not designed in a way that makes it inviting for somebody to come and sit there and hang out there. But it adds interest to the street. There's another component of private amenity space that these people are living, people are living in condominiums or apartments, and the idea that it is fair and right that people ought to have a place that is open where they can go get a breath of fresh air without, that is kind of on their property. But we wanted to differentiate between the private space and the public space. So we have civic space, which is clearly public space. Civic space may be green. There's green space, which is green space, and that's an element that we wanted to bring into it. And then there's the private amenity space, which is clearly private. That may also be green. And the thought was that bundled together, in the definition as we crafted it, bundled together, those things would be the open space as we are defining it for this particular regulatory purpose, and as we treat it in the waivers. And it is detailed. It's way more detailed, a little bit different than our overall definition in the bylaw. It's not the only definition in an overlay district that differentiates from the overall bylaw, but we really wanted this for the purposes of this 40R district, our downtown smart growth district, to really express what people want, and we bundled that all under open space so we could treat it as a percentage in the waivers.
Further discussion? Jess in the back row.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Joe Carnahan, Precinct 6. I move the question on this amendment.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay. This requires a 2/3 vote to end debate. All those in favor of ending debate on the proposed amendment, please rise. Thirty-eight.
14.
14.
19.
19. 32. 32. And those opposed to ending debate? 0.
5.
5. 2.
4.
4. The vote being 103 in the affirmative and 11 in the negative. The question has been moved. We will go straight to a vote on the proposed amendment. This is a hand count. All those in favor of the proposed amendment, please raise your hand. And those opposed? And the motion does not carry. We are back to the main motion as well as a motion to indefinitely postpone. What was that? I did. Yes, I did. Okay. Is there further discussion on the main motion? Mr. Berman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Barry Berman, Precinct 6. First, Ms. Klisch, you're doing a great job thinking on the fly, so you're doing great. Before I make my main point, there's a couple of things I wanted to address probably 20 speakers ago, hours ago, about kind of what the town used to look like and how they're just, how development is killing the town. I just want to say one thing really quickly. The state has done a study and estimates that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts right now needs a half a million new housing units. Now I know some of you think that maybe all those are being built in Reading. That's not the case. But what's going to impact your property values and your income is not whether Reading High has great SAT scores. It's going to be whether or not companies can recruit people to come into basically the greater Boston area, invest here, right, so that there's jobs, which will give people the money to buy houses. So I think it's really important to kind of keep that in mind, that this is not happening just in Reading. Every single town in the Commonwealth, or at least within 495, is clamoring for more housing, right? So it's just the state of things. So that's number one. But
Do we have a point of order? Excuse me. I believe it does.
Well,
Yeah.
neither did some of the other comments. But let me actually just talk about why I rose on this thing. So CPTC did a great job in sort of identifying who the stakeholders are and trying to accommodate what people's desires are for open space. Did a really good job in trying to take care of abutters who live in single or two-family houses that are sort of right on the edge of this space. But I think that there is one set of stakeholders that is not addressed in all of this zoning amendment. And actually, Mr. Talbot referred to a little bit in his comments. It's existing commercial tenants. Mr. Talbot talked about, well, we talked about Chute Street, that potentially we're going to lose maybe 4 commercial space. That may or may not be true, although actually I would argue we're going to lose 6. And why? Because there's no protection in this for any kind of negotiation where the town values people who put their hard-earned savings into building a business in order to kind of keep them there. So what I would like to do is actually make an amendment, propose an amendment, that kind of takes care of existing commercial tenants. And just, this is not something I made up. This was something that was actually originally part of sort of as this amendment was getting constructed, it was in there and then taken out. I think it's really important to take care of existing tenants. And so what I'd like to do is make an amendment to section 10.5.12, which is the waivers section. And I want to add bullet point 7. Now this is the part of the zoning amendment where we talk about the things that we really think are important to have addressed when a developer comes for seeking a waiver. And so I'd like to add bullet point 7, which basically adds space for existing commercial tenants, comma, so as to maintain current viable business on the premises post redevelopment or a plan in lieu. I can repeat that. Space for existing commercial tenants, comma, so as to maintain current viable businesses on the premises post redevelopment or a relocation plan in lieu. In other words, if you're all of that Ms. Klisch, all the projects that Ms. Klisch showed of the 8 projects, all but one of them were empty. They were either abandoned buildings or they were empty space that had no commercial tenants in them, with the exception of Chute Street. Okay, so there was nothing in there to kind of protect those tenants. A zoning amendment like a budget is basically a town's, it's our values, right? And what this amendment says is that we value the people who invested their hard-earned savings. The last corner, besides having the best French fries in Reading, have been there for 45 years. That's almost as long as Mr. Brown, right? The person who bought Nick's Dry Cleaner, B, if you don't know her name, invested her life savings to buy that, right? There is no, other than hiring a lawyer and just trying to kind of negotiate with the developer on his or her own, there is no prescription in here where we as a town say we value the people, commercial people. We're talking about bringing in business. Let's protect the ones that are already here. What this amendment will do, it will add taking care of existing commercial tenants as something that we care about when you're going to come to us for a variance. Thank you. I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. Space for existing commercial tenants, comma, so as to maintain current viable businesses on the premises post-redevelopment or a relocation plan in lieu. In other words, if you're not going to bring them back, then you need to figure out a way to find them another place.
Mr. Berman, I need to interrupt you for just a second. I cannot accept the proposed amendment until we have voted on the indefinite postponement. And then once, if that gets defeated, we can come back to you.
Okay.
Okay. So we can discuss both
Okay,
indefinite
so
postponement
it's
and
on
the
there, and if we defeat the...
Right. It isn't before the body right now.
Okay.
But, okay. Yeah. But you can still debate both indefinite postponement and voting for the main motion. It's effectively the same debate.
While I'm at the mic, can I talk about not indefinitely postponing? Just too much work's been done on this.
Okay.
Too much is at stake. I mean, we talk about valuing volunteers. How many hours of volunteer time went into this? And it's talking about our whole development future and our tax base. So no, I encourage you not to indefinitely postpone this. If we have to come back Thursday, so what? We'll come back on Thursday and we'll honor the people who did this and we'll get it done and we'll have a zoning.
Okay. Further discussion, either on the main motion or indefinite postponement. Yes, Mr. Ventura? Yes.
First of all, I'd like to apologize because when I made that point of order, I was still thinking open space in my mind. It's very late, and those were very complicated. So I'd like to make a motion to adjourn, but I do apologize because that was incorrect. I'd like to make a motion to
We have a
adjourn.
motion to adjourn is non-debatable. It does require a majority vote. Is there a second? Okay. No, the adjourn first. So we will go straight to that. It requires a majority vote, and I assume you mean adjourn until Thursday evening? Yes, okay. All those in favor of adjourning until Thursday evening, please raise your hand. Oh, hold on, point of order?
I believe we have to vote on Mr. Brown's motion to indefinitely postpone
No,
first, don't we?
adjournment comes first. It's the first thing that comes. Once that's made, we have to go straight to adjournment, straight to a vote on adjournment. So all those in favor of adjourning until Thursday evening, please raise your hand. And those opposed? And the chair is in doubt. All those that are in favor of adjourning until Thursday, please rise.
Yep. 15.
13 and 15? Okay.
12.
12? 17. And those opposed to adjournment?
Four.
4.
9.
9. 22. And who are we missing? We need one more number. I did not, 25. Thank you very much. Okay. The vote being 57 in the affirmative, 60 in the negative. The motion does not carry, and we continue. Further discussion on the main motion or indefinite postponement. Ms. Binder?
Which motion?
Angela Binder, Precinct 5, move the question.
Okay.
The article.
The entire, so are both the indefinite postponement and the main motion?
Oh, God, we're still doing. All right. So I just moved Barry's question then. Okay, sorry.
What's going on?
Did we vote on your amendment?
No.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I moved the question, Barry's
No,
amendment.
Barry's motion is not yet before the body. Right now, we have the main motion and the motion to indefinitely postpone. So do you want to end debate on indefinitely postponing? Is that what you're asking?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, we have a motion to end debate on indefinite postponement. Requires a 2/3 vote. Let me just make a note here. All those in favor of ending debate on the indefinite postponement, please rise. I just explained this to you. We are voting on ending debate on the motion to indefinitely postpone. We have to handle that before we can take any other amendments. So we're voting to end debate on the indefinite postponement.
21.
21?
12.
12.
We're not going to talk about it.
38?
Stand up.
I'm sorry.
34.
34? And John, what was yours?
38.
38, okay, I got that. Okay, now those opposed, 39? Those opposed to ending debate on the indefinite postponement, please rise.
2.
2, 0. 0.
2.
2. Okay, the vote being 105 in the affirmative, 4 in the negative, we have ended debate on the motion to indefinitely postpone. So we will now go to a vote. This requires a majority vote. Yes? I was about, adjourning ends the session for the night. Indefinitely postponing, if you vote in favor indefinite postponing, you would effectively kill the motion before you, the article, the motion under Article 15. So if you vote in favor of indefinitely postpone it, you're postponing it for the end of this meeting. So if you're opposed to this article and you want it to end, you will vote in favor of indefinite postponement. And it's almost the reverse of later when we vote on the main motion. So this is a motion to end this motion for this town meeting. Do you understand? Let me try this one more time. This has nothing to do with adjournment. This is the motion that is before us is under Article 15. We have a motion to indefinitely postpone the motion under Article 15. If you vote in favor of indefinitely postponing this, that is the end of this article. We would not even go to a vote. It would be the end of Article 15. And this requires only a majority vote. Point of order? Please quiet, please. You will have killed everything under Article 15 if you vote in favor of indefinite postponement. It has nothing to do with adjournment. That's a separate motion.
So it means we will keep the existing 40R bylaw.
Correct.
Pardon me.
Correct.
but I
Yes.
thought-
Thank you. Yes. So the existing bylaw, Ms. Freed?
Yeah. If the motion to indefinitely postpone fails, we go back to the main motion. You can continue to debate the main motion, and then there will be a subsequent vote on the main motion. So just
Correct.
want to be clear that that's what would happen if
Right.
indefinite postponement fails.
So voting in favor of it ends everything under Article 15. If it fails, we will then go back to debate and possibly amendments. Yes?
Can we have that vote again? Can we rescind that vote and have it again somehow? Because it's clear that enough people.
That was just the end of the debate.
So,
Never mind.
Okay. So, we have ended debate on indefinite postponement. So we are about to take a vote on indefinite postponement. Again, if you vote in favor of it, it means you have killed the article. And it only requires a majority vote. So all those in favor of indefinite postponement, please raise your hand. Those opposed? And the motion does not carry. We are back to the main motion.
Point of order, Mr. Moderator?
Point of order?
Do I have to make my
Would you like to,
motion again?
do you now have
Or
a
is it,
proposed
like,
amendment?
kind of already on there?
Well, okay, we will now take your proposed
Oh, okay.
amendment. All right, okay, is there a second to Mr. Berman's? Yep. Okay, discussion now turns to the proposed amendment. Mr. Arena.
I like the spirit of Mr. Berman's amendment. My only question is to Ms. Klisch or Ms. Mercier, whether, as written, the word space is judgmental or subjective as to how much the commercial tenant would need, either in lieu or in the new building. Is that provide sufficient? Is it sufficiently clear as written so that you couldn't squeeze the current tenant by offering him an inadequate space and still meet the letter of the law?
I might actually turn that to council. I mean, I understand what's being said, but I might see if there's any specificity that's needed in that. Is space adequate? Because we aren't saying same space.
Correct. It's a subjective assessment.
It is subjective, and it would, we would probably have to consider whether, we would probably have to consider the adequacy of space without
Well, this is in the whole section above, which gives CPDC authority. We'll take into consideration, you have the judgment. My question to you is that strong enough, or is there still wiggle room?
I think it's probably strong enough because we have a lot of discretion under this section anyhow. Oh, Tony, do you disagree with me?
Okay. Further discussion way in the far, yes, Ms. Doctor?
Nancy, Dr. Precinct 1. Could we have some clarity? Mr. Berman suggested that this had been removed. If you could just give us a little background. Was this taken out of the document? And that's why he's putting it back, just to clarify his statement?
Ms. Klisch?
Thank you. And I actually, since Mr. Duretz is up here, might ask. I actually don't recall discussing this, but we did have a lot of late-night meetings that went far later than this. So I don't recall discussing this and removing it, so I might see if any of my colleagues do.
Is there a response? Mr. DeRezzo?
Thank you. Tony DeRezzo, Precinct 2, Associate CPDC member. First, I don't recall this being as part of the proposed zoning bylaw changes. I do realize it was a major question for the Chute Street development. As for the word space being adequate, I agree with the intent behind it, but there are a couple of issues. Number one, you can't guarantee that the price for the new space will be affordable to the tenant. And number two, I'm not aware of any small business that can be out of business for a year or a year and a half while a building is being built to move right back in. I agree 100% with the intent. I don't believe that this will do anything to help a business that exists in a building that they don't own, that the landlord decides that he's going to demolish and rebuild.
Yes, Mr. Bacci.
Thank you, Carlo Bacci, Precinct 5. I agree with Tony, and I also applaud Mr. Berman's efforts. I would love to see if Last Corner gets displaced and Green Tomato gets displaced and the dry cleaners gets displaced, that they can come back, but this is not enforceable whatsoever. These are private businesses, private developments, and just like Mr. DeRezzo said, this is just, you can put any kind of language in there. This is not enforceable by a town government. It's all private. And it's sad, but I don't think it's enforceable at all.
Further discussion? Mr. Berman?
Well, that's why, Barry Berman, Precinct 6. That's why I put this amendment where it is, and why I also added language for a relocation plan in lieu of bringing someone back. It's probably unlikely that a lot of places are going to be able to afford the rent, right? But all bullet points 1 through 6 talk about what we think is important in a zoning ordinance, that we want to hold developers' feet to the fire. We talk about open space. We talk about basically the quality of the district, parking plans, nice design. Those are all things that we sort of hold dear, which is why we're putting them in a thing where these are the things that if you want a waiver, these are the things you're gonna have to address. I'm just adding one more thing. I don't know if the dry cleaner is gonna afford to go back there or even wanna go back there, but I think that it's also important that we stand up for the existing businesses, and we just make this one more thing the developer has to kind of come to find a solution for, right? Take care of our existing businesses. Because some of these business owners don't live in Reading. They can't even be on the floor here at town meetings. So if they can't speak for themselves, this body has to speak for them, and we're just adding one more thing that we want you, Mr. Developer, Ms. Developer, to figure out, because we think it's important. You want density, you want less parking, you want more units. How are you going to take care of them? And is it enforceable? No, but at least we're putting the conversation on the table, right? Saying that we think it's important. This is a budget and a zoning ordinance. It's basically a reflection of our values, right? And if we want to, we're talking about bringing in new businesses. If we're subtracting 2, and then we have to bring in 4 just to get to, right? Let's see if we can just, put something in there that makes the developer think that we care about it, and then therefore they'll try to address it. It's a negotiating tool, and that's why it's in there. Thank you.
Saw a hand up on the back. Yes, the corner.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Joe Carnahan, Precinct 6. I'd like to move to adjourn to time certain on Thursday, May 5th, 7:30.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn until Thursday. This is non-debatable and requires a majority vote. All those in favor of adjourning, please raise your hand. And those opposed? And the chair is in doubt again. Please, all those in favor of adjournment, please rise.
Start over.
11.
11,
15.
24, and 15.
19.
19. Those opposed to adjournment?
Eight.
8,
15.
15,
4.
4,
We're out of here.
16.
16. The vote being 69 in the affirmative, 43 in the negative. This town meeting stands adjourned until Thursday evening.